You know, when you are about to say I'm starting the meeting and then one more board member walks in, so I'll pause for a moment so that Donna can have a chance to sit down, just in time to stand up for the pledge. We are expecting the other two board members. Let me call this regular meeting of the Board of Education in Fairfield to order for September 8th, 2015. Present is Ms. Donna Carnell, Mrs. Jessica Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Mr. John Convertito, Mr. Paul Fatterbean, Mrs. Jennifer Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. John Llewellyn. So, if I can have you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For those who are regular attenders of board meetings, you may see that we have a larger attendance here at the moment because on the agenda, you'll see that we will be making a presentation in recognition of work of students who are here. And so let me check, if I might, as to how many members of the public may be here just to comment on an agenda item or a voting item. If you could raise your hands, and then I'll know whether it's two. Okay, so we'll go in the order that we normally go in. So public comment for items on the agenda that are for discussion items, or you can wait till the item is up for discussion, or for voting items, and that discussion has to occur when the item is up for vote. So if I can have you come forward and state your name and address.
Hi, I'm Monique Sudikoff from 472 Lockwood Road, and I'm here to comment on agenda item number 6, approval of the minutes. I'm urging the board to minimize the time spent on discussion of approval of the minutes and other procedural matters, such as the bylaws, voting without all members present, and whether or not to extend meetings past 11:30 when you've spent so much time arguing over approving the minutes that the meetings have gone exceedingly long. I feel that the board has done great work this summer, just thinking back for the past few months, but there has been an exceeding amount of delay over these procedural matters, and it's gotten to the point that, frankly, I think it's an embarrassment to the good work that this board is capable of. I'm hoping by commenting publicly that the board will know how seriously the public takes this and will minimize the procedural discussions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to come forward? Please state your name and address.
My name is Bill Dunn, 205 Tuckahoe Lane, Fairfield, Connecticut. I'm the vice chair of the Osborne Hill Building Committee. I've got a couple of comments regarding our building project, and this probably is the most efficient venue for me to share them with you.
And actually, if I can interrupt for a moment,
Sure.
and you want to share that now as a member of the public rather than join with the chair at the presentation time?
That was my question to you. I don't want to upset your process with the minutes and all, and I know there's a lot of
As long
people
as
here.
as long as the chair, where's the chair?
Kim Marshall
Kim,
here.
do you mind if both of you talk at the same time? Not at the same time, but share?
No,
So
I'll be more than happy to talk
Feel free to wait till the
after.
next, till it's on the agenda.
That sounds fine.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but you're welcome to do either, but it's probably more
No,
cohesive if you all
this-
talk at the same time.
Well, and it'll work better this way. Okay,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Any other member of the public wish to come forward and present to the board?
Lisa Davey, Fairfield, Connecticut. I wanted to speak to the district-wide improvement initiatives because I don't know if it's something that the public will have a chance to talk about. And there were a number that I was very interested in, so I thought I would put that information out there, and perhaps the board will ask those questions, or Dr. Title will perhaps expound upon them a little bit for the public. In the first section of instructional program, I see number 7 is revise and implement additional common assessments. I pray we don't have any more assessments for our children, unless we get rid of other ones that aren't working, because they spend so much time on these assessments. I know that they're very important for the teachers, but I think it's find the ones that work best for them. Number 8 is also to implement professional learning to strengthen instructional practices for students with disabilities and ELL. There are a number of professional learning initiatives, and I'd love that we could learn just a little bit more about that, because it also mentions about teaching to the block, in the block, and how we go about that. Because with the initiatives, obviously it's an outline, but I think the public would be interested in knowing more. As far as teams improvement plans, I would very much like to know where we're going with the alternative high school. I know that we've gone ahead and hired someone to engage in a full-time position there so that we can do a better job with the alternative high school, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that plan. Again, number 3, leadership capacity. Number 19 is implement Leadership Academy Module number 1. Also relates to special education processes and practices. I think there's a lot of special ed stuff in here, which is terrific. I think it's really great that we're tackling this in year 1. But I would love to know a little bit more about it, and maybe everyone could speak to how the initiatives get rolled out during this first year. Will we kind of know what they are and then not hear anything until May or June, or will there be updates? And finally, I think the final one that is very interesting is to expand options for mental health support for students in grades 9 through 12. I think, again, high school really should be focused on, but I don't know what that means in terms of what the school will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other member of the public wish to come forward? Seeing nobody rising, we'll move on to item number 4A, Fairfield Woods Middle School History Day recognition. Do you wish to make any comments before coming forward?
No, I think I'll just pass it over to Dr. Rosato and let him make the presentation.
Come right on. Come right up. Right here. Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. It's a principal's dream to be able to present and celebrate the hard work of these young students. I'm going to just begin with a little bit of background and context so you sort of understand the scope of what these young students have done. National History Day is a nonprofit organization based in College Park, Maryland. It offers year-long academic programs to middle and high school students from around the world. Last school year, tens of thousands, literally, students from across the United States participated in National History Day around the theme Leadership and Legacy in History. In Connecticut alone, over 4,000 middle and high school students participated. Under the careful guidance and instruction of their teacher, Mrs. Alice Warren, 32 eighth graders from Fairfield Woods were among those who participated and presented at the regional competition at Fairfield University in March. Of those 32, 17 advanced to the state competition at Central Connecticut in New Britain. Following the state competition, these 5 students further advanced to the national competition, held over 4 days in June at the University of Maryland. Now, in order to participate in National History Day, students are asked to conduct original research throughout the school year to answer such questions as, how was my topic or person significant in history in relation to the theme Leadership and Legacy? How did my topic or person develop and evolve over time? How did the events and the atmosphere of my person's time period influence them in history? Now, students are free to present their work individually or in groups in a variety of ways, including research papers, exhibits, performances, documentaries, and websites. I'm so pleased tonight and proud to present to you these 5 students of history, now high school freshmen here in Fairfield, who represented their classmates, themselves, and the entire Fairfield community so admirably in the local, state, and national competitions. When I call out your name, if you would just wave. Ethan Rodier, Peter Cullen, Matthew Holden, Mark Handler, and Samir Singh researched and presented their winning entry, Igor Sikorsky, Pioneer, Innovator, Aviator. Now, the long road to National History Day begins in the classroom, where students choose a person or a topic reflecting the theme of the year. They conduct research and analysis and then share their findings in a manner of their own choosing, all under the watchful eye of their teacher. It has been my privilege and pleasure to work with their dedicated teacher, Alice Warren, who exemplifies the National History Day mission by encouraging a lifelong interest in Connecticut's rich history. I'm also pleased to share that Alice was recently presented the History Channel Award for her commitment and dedication to this program. National History Day is a collaboration among Connecticut's various historical societies and dedicated educators who love to share their passion for the study of history. At Woods, it was also supported financially and in spirit by our very generous PTSA and the parents of these students. I would also like to just also recognize Mr. Frank Sahagian, who's in the audience, one of our other 8th grade teachers who was also incredibly supportive, as well as Dr. Greg Puglisi, the social studies coordinator, who also helped and was very supportive along the way. Please join me in congratulating all of these talented Fairfield historians.
Now, before you go away, if you could come around and stand in front. We're doing it the other way so that the picture is So we appreciate that you looked at us while the presentation was being made. We're having you here so that your parents can commemorate this and hold on to it until you're 30 and then show you.
Yes.
Part of the requirement, though, is that you stay for the entire Board of Education meeting.
That'll be history. That could violate one of
Yes.
the provisions of the Constitution, however. so-
Probably. To remind the board, as well as staff who are present, frequently the RTM and/or the Board of Selectmen will recognize public school sports teams that have achieved state recognition. At the board here, we generally like to recognize groups of students or individual students who have had academic success or been very much involved in club and activities. And so I remind the board that anytime they catch somebody doing something good, they're welcome to contact Jessica Gerber, and we'll arrange for a time to have them presented to the board, if you will. And that goes for the staff as well. Osborne Hill.
Excuse me one second.
Excuse me, yeah.
Thank you very much. Do we know, did all the middle schools participate in History Day? Because I know Miss Beatty ran a fabulous program several years back at Roger Ludlow. And I think it's something that the board should be supporting, and
That's a quick
Outstanding.
question. Does Dr. Rosardo have an answer to that question? Don't really know the answer. If it's a long answer, then for the benefit of... Okay, we'll get you... Oh, okay, we do have a person who can answer that.
Right.
Do come up to the table and the microphones for the benefit of the Fair TV audience. State
We
your
should
name
mention
so
that this individual just recently was awarded his doctorate.
Thank you very much. Greg Puglisi.
And you understood the question?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Greg Puglisi, I'm the social studies curriculum leader, 6 through 12. It is not officially part of the curriculum, although I'm a big supporter of the program, and we are looking for ways to expand it, but it's not officially part.
Okay, thank you. Do you know if the other schools were able to participate last year?
On a small scale, but
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Convertito.
Just quickly through the chair, Dr. Rosado had mentioned that it had been supported financially through the PTAs and so forth. Can you give me a ballpark as to what that cost was?
When these 5 students were moving on to the trip to the University of Maryland. There was some money involved in that, so I went before the PTA and asked if they would offset the cost by $150 per student.
Is that it, Mr. Constantino? Thank you very much.
Sorry, as a follow-up, does that mean parents themselves funded a portion of it?
Yes.
They did. Okay, thank you.
The rest of it.
On to item number B, Osborne, letter B, Osborne Hill Building Committee. Ms. Kimberly Marshall and Mr. William Dunn. Do you wish to make any comments, or?
Well, I will, now that you mention it. So I want to point out that this project has been a long slog for a lot of people. And the entire Osborne Hill community has been incredibly patient and understanding. The parents, the teachers, the principal, and really to get these kinds of projects done, you really need a partnership with the building committee, with our staff, with the principal and the staff at the school. And I was just really pleased to see how much progress had been made and that we could finally open up a real gym in the fall. So I just, before we get into some of the nitty-gritty, I'd like to thank both of these individuals for their service to the community, because it's really a thankless task, and you've done really well with it.
Thank you very much. I'm Kim Marshall. I'm the chair of the building committee. I'll update you to where we're at right now, and quite honestly, we're pretty much at 99% of completion. We had 3 phases of the renovation project. All of them are complete with just normal minor punch list items. The first phase included window and door replacement on the south wing, hallway flooring replacement, and related abatement. This work was done during last summer vacation. The second phase, which overlapped the first phase, included mitigation of hazardous materials in the gymnasium, removal of the roof, installation of new windows and doors, installation of sunscreens at the windows, new gym flooring, new sports wall pads, basketball hoops, and lighting. This started in the summer of 2014, and it concluded this summer. The third phase included window and door replacements and related abatement at the other end of the school, and this work was completed by the start of school. We are finalizing the overall cost for the project and should have that information within the month. At this point, we anticipate we will have a very substantial portion of our contingency remaining unspent. We were very fortunate in the lack of use of the contingency with the work that we did this summer. As you may recall, we had requested additional money during the second phase because we were involved with a lot of demolition of the existing gym. We were encountering a lot of unforeseen abatement work and additional masonry work. The abatement work alone used about 60% of the project contingencies that we used, and they were on all, unavoidable. Our clerk of the works and the architect monitored and negotiated all the additional work, and we're very pleased with the result. Just have a few minor things that have to get finalized. Regarding the walkway, we had put the plans for the walkway out for rebid during the spring with very poor results. The one bid came in way over budget. We had a base bid and we had an alternate, and both of them were well above what we could justify paying for, let alone we only had about half that money. So what our plans are at this time are to put it out for bid again after the first of the year in the winter, and hopefully we would get pricing that would fit what the contingency is that we have remaining. Otherwise, I guess you guys get the money back, if We don't spend
The
it.
town.
We don't get anything back. You may remember, that I want to let your vice chair speak as well.
Yes.
That at the time that the building committee requested the additional money for remediation, the issue of the walkway came up in quite a heated debate at the RTM. The RTM really, members really believed that when they voted for the project that they were voting for a walkway. And at the end of that, the decision was made at that point not to appropriate additional money for the walkway, thinking that there was enough money in the project to finish it. So we'll see where that goes. So there is an expectation, I think, by the community that we will have a walkway, and once the plan is rebid and the numbers come in, if there's money, then that's what's going to happen. But in any case, if there's money left in the project, it goes back to the town. The town just wouldn't be bonding it. The money does not come back to the Board of Ed for any purpose whatsoever.
Mr. Dunn.
Maybe if there are any other questions that the board has regarding the project, and then I can just summarize the couple of comments that I had.
After that, okay. Any questions from the board on the Osborne Hill project? Mr. Patton.
Do you have ballpark numbers in terms of what's left in contingency that we might have towards the?
I'd rather give a range.
That's fine.
Probably 275 to 300,000 out of the 340.
So the bids that we got last spring were close to like the 500-600 range?
Closer to 700,
Seven. Okay.
unfortunately.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the board? Any other questions from
I want to make one more positive comment.
One comment, right? No questions, correct?
Okay.
So, did you want to make a final wrap-up comment, and then Dr. Tuttle will make a comment?
Certainly, that's fine. I think I'm probably violating some political correctness with the first two, with the election less than 60 days away. However, I got some.
But if you go too far, I'll interrupt
Okay,
you.
I've got some kind words to say about two Democrats. I'd like to think that I've done a couple of smart things over the past 2.5 years. However, one of the smartest ones I've done is to nominate Kim Marshall as chairman of our building committee. As you know, this project wasn't a slam dunk, and there was a lot of unexpected events that occurred. Just last week, we approved a $100,000 invoice for the final removal and discarding of asbestos-contaminated materials. Kim's experience in the construction business, along with her having served on previous town building committees, has been invaluable to the success of this project, and it's been a pleasure working with her. Likewise, I'd like to, both as a committee member and a former Osborne Hill parent, I'd like to express my appreciation to Jessica Gerber for all of her efforts on behalf of this project. It takes a special person to advocate for a project, get the project started, push for the funding, and then see it through. Remaining involved when you don't have the opportunity to vote who does the project or how the project gets done must be very difficult. But we wouldn't be here tonight giving your board this update if it wasn't for her dedication and active involvement in all phases of this project. The last comment I have that I want to share with you is regarding some windows. Hopefully, you'll keep it in mind in the future. When you're reviewing window projects and asking your questions like you do as far as what needs to get done for these projects and all, one of the questions that you need to ask is how do the screens get attached to the windows? Now, I know that sounds intuitively obvious, but basically, if the response is that they're installed with little plastic clips that the manufacturer, are recommended by the manufacturer, it may be affordable, but it doesn't always work. So the manufacturer will blame the installer will blame the manufacturer, and they kind of go back and forth. So you need to ask the question and probably provide the answer that you need metal clips with safety screws. And this is what we're going to do with one of the punch list items. And if it doesn't work, I'll make sure I come back here and tell you that it doesn't work. But I know you've got several Windows projects coming up, and Osborne Hill is a one-story school. So if the screens sag or fall out. It's only one story. You don't have to get on the ladder to put them back on. But like I said, I just wanted to share that with you all for what it's worth.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Title, you have any final comments?
I just want to point out one nice feature. I'm not sure whose idea this was, but we should keep this in mind as we move forward with other projects. The sunscreens that were mentioned are really cool in the sense that when they're pulled down, if you're on the inside of the classroom, you can see out. But if you're on the outside of the classroom, you can't see in. So there's a nice security feature to that without darkening the room so much that the kids would feel claustrophobic about that. And I just think that's something to keep in mind going forward, because it's got a substantive value, it's got a security value, and it's not something that's really intrusive on the learning. So whoever came up with that idea, it's
It was
great.
probably the design professionals, because I don't think that we
Okay.
necessarily would have thought that through.
All right. I mean, it's just, as I walked around, I said, this is really cool. So anyway, thank you all.
So the entire board thanks you for your service. As you know, we pass the ed specs, and then the building committee takes it from there. So it is your project, and you should be proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Item 4C, overview of SBAC, CMT, capped results. Dr. Boyce and Mr. Cummings. Again, do you wish to make any opening comments?
Well, I would just say that these results came out really not that long ago. And I just want to thank Dr. Boyce and Mr. Cummings and the curriculum leaders for turning these around so quickly. We've not had a chance to do as in-depth an analysis as we would like to do. Also, because this is the first time that SBAC has been given, we had to familiarize ourselves with all the different labels and nomenclature and try to figure out sort of the normal comparisons you make are not necessarily make a lot of sense this time around because it's the first year of a new assessment. So this is sort of our first cut at it. It's by no means the last look at it. But I just want to thank them and the curriculum leaders, because I asked them, I think, last Friday before the long weekend, could we possibly get this in the packet for Thursday? And after rolling their eyes, they came through. So I just want to thank them. I'll turn it over to Dr. Boyce and Mr. Cummings. We also put a couple other one late-breaking item at your places, and Dr. Boyce will talk about that, and that's the SAT results that just recently came out. And she also has a copy of the AP results, so we can get a sort of fuller picture of the state assessments. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Title, and good evening, everyone. We are here tonight, as Dr. Title said, to speak to the results. As he said as well, we've only had these for about a week and a half. We do need to go through them more thoroughly, and we need to get the building principals and building leaders at every location involved as well in our discussion. But tonight we're going to go through some of the results, walk you through those, and answer any questions you may have. Please know in advance that more than likely we're going to be recording your questions rather than answering, because we're at that point of early discovery. So if we would all turn, please, to Table 1, which is the SBA Fairfield and state results. And this is simply a comparative chart, one of several, the first three, that compare each of our grade levels 3 through 8 and grade 11 on comparison of the ELA and math assessments, Fairfield performance versus state performance, against the 4 levels as well as the combined 3 and 4 level. At the SBA, the 3 and 4 level, again, is the levels of meeting or exceeding goal. If you think back to CMT, capped, it's the equivalent of goal and above goal in the CMT and capped. We also have on the third table the science results from grades 5, 8, and 11. Again, as you look at these results, you'll see that essentially, as we talked about in our cover memo, Fairfield performance, the district performance across against the state was very strong. We see growth as the grades ensue from grades 3 through 8 up to 11 in ELA. We see growth in the elementary growing through 3, 4, 5, and then in 6. There's work clearly to be done on all this as we further examine the results. But our initial assessment is that the preparation that took place across the district for a number of years to get ready for, well, to implement the Connecticut core standards and then move forward to prepare students for the taking of the SBA assessments was largely successful. Is there anything?
The only thing I would like to add to that is if you recall at the middle and high school, you approved the ELA curriculum a few years ago. We've now had 3 full years of implementation. And when you start to think about all the pieces that might have contributed to these scores, certainly that is one piece, not the only piece. But the fact that we've had that curriculum in place for so many years, I think was a very positive factor. The other thing I'll go ahead and point out now, something that jumped out at us, and I mentioned in the memo, of course, are the results for the 2 high schools. Purely an anomaly. It surprised us when we saw it. You'll see in the capped results, that same discrepancy does not exist, as well as in the memo I left at your seats for you for the SAT and the AP. That discrepancy also does not exist. So I have no doubt that the staff at Ward is diving into that, trying to figure out what happened. And we'll, I'd like to tell you what the answer is tonight, and I don't have it.
You have further comments or presentations? You're going to keep going, okay.
Okay. The next set of documents, next set of tables, begin with Table 4, Table 5, Table 6, which are the elementary results for English Language Arts, grades 3, 4, and 5, and then Table 7, and 8, which is the middle school and high school results, grades 6, 7, 8, and 11, and followed by Table 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, which are the equivalent tables for math. One of the things pointed out in our memo, and these charts bear prime example for it, one of the things we've got to look at in more detail as we go forward, and this is, again, essential to the work that the principals and their building leadership teams will provide, is what accounts for differences at grade levels in different buildings. We know in the past certain indicators around a number of students with English as a second language or free and reduced lunch status, for example, might bear some indication on performance. But the other things that we have to delve into more deeply are related to particular classrooms. The tenures of teachers, for example, might be a factor that we have to look at. Teachers' length of time, not only in the district, but perhaps length in the grade level. These are all things that we're going to look at more further as we go forward. Please keep in mind that not only will this work be examined in more detail by the district data team, but it will be examined by the school data teams, and a response to these results will be included in the department improvement plans and the school improvement plans.
I just wanted to put a caveat on when you're looking at, this really applies at the elementary level. When you're looking at school-by-school results, you're often dealing with very small numbers. So, 2 percentage points or 3 percentage points at a school could be one student. So we have to understand that we're dealing with very small sample sizes. They're not sample sizes, tested populations there. However, we also can go back and look at if the same pattern existed on the CMT on some schools compared to others. So if it happened one year, that could be just a particular class and a small n. But if it's something that's persisted for a number of years, then that tells us something else is going on. But we do know that there are certain grades, cohorts of kids that move through school who, for whatever reason, perform better on tests than others. And that, combined with the fact that every child is worth 2.5 to 3 percentage points, can make the percentages have wide swings in them. We don't go perform a t-test to see if it's statistically significant, but I think your eyes can kind of tell you whether it is or not. I just wanted to put those caveats out there. We do look at this, but I think people should keep in mind the small number of test takers at the elementary level can skew the results.
I'd also like to add that if you recall, we've now implemented the math curriculum at the middle and high schools for 2 full years and used those resources for two full years. And when we presented that to you, we said the middle school math curriculum had some of the biggest changes for the students. And I think part of what we will be doing now is looking at the relatively strong scores in 6th grade and trying to determine how we can build on that to carry that into the 7th and 8th grade and into the high school. We'll be meeting the curriculum leaders as well as, and I'm assuming the elementary will do this, I know we're doing it at the middle. We're going to sit down with each principal and really go through their school data with them and help them determine next steps in terms of their school data team, so that they have our assistance in setting up a process for evaluating and diving into the data for their own school and their own students.
Table 14 is the science CMT and CAP results. As the board, I know, is fully aware, the state hangs on to the CNT and CAP pending changes in the testing, which will be coming in a number of years now. But the CMT and CAP science is given again in grades 5, 8, and 11. District performance is measured here, again, by across the schools. And again, you notice the differences in band. On the SBA test, there are only 4 bands of student performance. Again, on the CMT and on CAP, there are 5 bands of student performance, with the ideal being those students who are testing into levels 4 and 5, the goal and advanced. And our last set of tables, or excuse me, tables, yeah, it's 15 through, sorry about that, 17 are comparisons, as much as we can make them, of district performance on the SBA compared to the last iteration of the CMT in 2013 for reading and writing and math. So a couple points here is, one, in the SBA now groups reading and writing together under the ELA assessment. In the past, under CMT, reading and writing were grouped separately, and so that's why you see both scores for both of those tests. And again, math it was the same. It was a single test for math under the CMT as it is for the SBA. The performance there shows a variety. Some cases the percentages are below what they were in the past. The gap is below what it was in the past, and others it remains level, and in many cases it actually goes up. It's a caution, though. Again, these are 2 totally different assessments, and there's no way, in a sense, that statistically you can compare performance on the SBA. Let's take a single student's performance on the SBA to their taking on the CMT to the SBA. But it again gives us a sense as a metric or as a guidepost to see how the district is performing compared to state averages. And again, as in the past, the district has exceeded state averages and has done quite well.
So this is sort of a crude way of comparing things that really aren't comparable. And I think the Hartford Courant actually tried to put an algorithm in where you could go through and do this, so we thought we would try it. Because you know that across the board, the percentage of students meeting or exceeding the benchmark, whether you call it goal or whatever it's called, level 4 or up, or level 3 or up on the SBA. Across the state, the percentage achieving that level declined pretty significantly, particularly in math across the state. And so if you're looking at our scores in the abstract, the question is, how do we do relative to the state? We know we're always, above the state average, but is there a way of seeing where we are relative to the state, knowing that they went down? Did we go down as much as the state? Did we stay about the same? And in some cases, it's variable. In some cases, the percentage point difference is exactly the same. If you look at grade 4 ELA, 17 percentage points above the state, all across the board, no matter how you look at it. In other cases, you can see that we outperformed relative to the state compared to how we had done previously. Examples of that, 6th grade and 7th grade ELA. You can also see in fifth grade ELA, as an example, our ELA scores are hardly budged from where they were on the CMTs. In other cases, we didn't outperform as much as we did on the state. So we have to dig into why that might be. So grade 3 ELA, while we exceeded the state, we had previously outperformed them by, say, 20 percentage points. This time, we only outperformed them by 13 percentage points. So that's what that was trying to do, to get some sort of benchmark to previous administrations of the test. Okay, that's why that's in there. And I think that, people can get alarmed by the drop in the absolute number, but at the same time, you can see that we're pretty consistently outperforming by about the same amount. If you look over at math, you can see that our two biggest areas where we outperformed previously are fifth grade and sixth grade. Okay. And then I think, Meg, you want to talk about so we were concerned about this Ward Ludlow thing. Because we really don't think, all of our other assessments at those two schools have always shown the schools to be pretty close. And it was such an aberration. I think it's a real caution about high school, comparing these high school scores across the state in general. Some high schools had massive numbers of kids actually opt out of the test, had participation rates below 30%, 40%. And you just don't know who took it and who didn't. In other places, while students may not have physically opted out, they clearly mentally opted out. Because on no other measure that we have seen is this spread ever occurred, where you look at scores out of Ludlow with a very high percentage participation rate, and they're in the top 8 in the state on both ELA and math. And Ward is not close to that. And that's just not in concert with our other data points. And so to bolster that point, first, of course, you can look at the science and see the results on the science 10th grade capped, which are very similar. But Meg's going to now take you through the SAT and the AP results, and I think you'll see similar.
Right. I was able today to get the SAT results by school and for the state. And you may have, I've heard a lot on the news about the SAT scores declining and more students taking it. Our scores declined very slightly between both schools. But if you look at the middle table in the memo, you'll see that the two schools have identical scores in math and very close scores in reading with a larger gap in writing. So that we don't see a repeat of the SBAC information there. The AP results I actually sent you during the summer, so it may look familiar, but I sent it again just so I could have these two together for you. Excuse me. And once again, if you look at the lower chart, L for Ludlow, W for Ward, you see actually Ward has a larger AP enrollment, about the same number of tests taken, and then the 3 or above is close between the two, the number of students getting a score of 3 or above. So again, we haven't seen the same discrepancy in the AP results, and certainly the capped, the AP results, and the SAT are certainly very important data points as well.
But also in the AP enrollment and scores, if you look at the top chart, you could see the trend has accelerated. That 1,702 were enrolled in AP in 2015, a record high number of AP tests taken, 1,331, and the number of students achieving 3 or higher was high. So that's been something that we have been working on, getting more kids to take the AP class. And we also believe that, if you might recall, last year in June, a year ago from June, the board approved the AP psychology course, which was popular with students and accounts for some of the increase, but not all of the increase in the AP enrollment. So we continue to have very strong AP enrollment. don't know if that honor roll hasn't come out yet, but I would be surprised if
Yeah.
we're not on it again.
I'm counting on it.
So, anyway, I think that's.
Yeah, and I think that's, I wanted just to add, it's a tribute to all the teachers who have these students before they get into the AP course, as well as the teachers who work with them. So a lot of work goes into students achieving this level, and our students are doing a great job.
That's it.
Questions from the board? Mrs. Lou McCormick?
When you have more time to do further analysis, will you be looking at how our results compare versus our DRG? I think it'd be interesting, just because the absolute numbers, I don't know that they mean that much to everybody. Like 60%, is that good, is that bad? I don't really know, because it's a harder test. But I think what is interesting is to see how the respective districts all did, and then compare that same kind of performance when we had the CMTs and see if there's still a similar pattern. And also just to see if, in fact, our new curriculum has actually raised us in the rankings versus our peers, as we would hope. And I guess I would also say on that note, you had mentioned that, we've had 3 years of the new ELA curriculum and 2 years of the new math curriculum in place. Are we going to be getting that review of the performance and the results this November? Because I know we've talked about that for a while. We said we wanted to wait for 2 years to be under our belts, and we've had 2 and 3 years now, so.
Let me just clarify, that's at the secondary level. I don't know, I don't want to speak for how long the curriculum's been in place at the elementary, but I'll let.
Well, the update that we're scheduled for this year during the 15-16 year is math K-12. That is right now tentatively scheduled for April. It's when we did the art last year. So we'll be giving you a status update on math that's been in place K-12, so it'll be a K-12 report. That's the next one that's up on the docket. I should point out one other thing about doing comparisons across districts is the window to give this test was much wider than the window for CMT. CMT used to be given in a very short period of time. Pretty much everybody gave the whole test in about 2 weeks, and it was the same 2 weeks. It used to be in September, then it was in March. This time, the window extended from March all the way to practically the end of May. It's a huge difference in terms of a student's performance if they've had the opportunity for 4, 5, 6, 7 additional weeks. And different school systems gave the test at different times. There's no accounting for that, I have learned, in the performance. Some school districts might have given it early to sort of get it over with. Some of it had to do with availability of computer labs. We know we gave our high school one at the end of the window because we wanted to get the AP over with for the juniors, and so we waited till the last possible minute, but then you risk the summer fever coming in, and your results could suffer from that. So it's possible, looking across districts, we don't know this for sure, and I think they're going to tighten it, that just one caveat is that, if we gave, say, 6th grade math test or 7th grade math test on April 1st, another district gave it on May 1st, I think that confounds the results a bit. I just throw that out. There's just a lot of caveats and unknowns about this. I mean, I think the extent to which students were prepared and had the ability to actually manipulate the technology is a big factor in this, and we need to try to tease that out. That's within our own district. But I just wanted to point out that this window is very wide. We will do that analysis and be happy to share it. But I just have I've got some real concerns about a lot of these results across districts this year because of that. It's just such an unknown.
Thank you.
So,
Fair
Any
point.
other comments, Mrs. Lou McCormick?
Yeah, I just wanted to finish up. Yeah, so that would be great, even though I know there's a lot of contingencies to the results. That's probably true across all the different districts. Some of them, we'll do better than some because we took it later. We'll do worse than others. who knows? But I think it's still interesting just to see if there's a pattern. And also the relativity, I think, is all you can really take from it at this point in a benchmark year. So that's probably the most important takeaway from my perspective. And then back to the ELA and the review of the ELA and math elementary curriculum. I'm more focused on the elementary curriculum. If that's going to be reviewed in April also, I'm concerned that that's another whole year that goes by, and it's been well over 2 years now since that's been implemented. So I would make a motion then to ask if we can do a review of the elementary curriculum for ELA and math in November. I think that'd be very good for the board to be able to have that discussion earlier in that presentation so that we can then be more free to implement something sooner rather than waiting for another whole year to go through.
I would remind the board that the review schedule for curriculum is in your budget book. You may recall that we normally had a review schedule that talked about when we updated and reviewed and approved curriculum, and this past year we added to that the review schedule for all curriculum. So the review schedule for math is coming up, and English language arts and the various other curriculums is all scheduled based on doing it 2 years after it's initiated.
Understood, but it's been more than 2 years now.
I would refer you to the schedule. I'm not.
Well, that's why I was making a motion to accelerate it from the schedule.
That would be adding an agenda item to an item to the agenda for action, which.
Okay, I'll do that then.
Well, no, first you'd have to add it by vote of 6 members of this board.
Okay. I'll make that motion then to,
Could you be clear on the motion so that the secretary?
yeah, I would like to make a motion to add the acceleration of the ELA and
Sorry,
math
can you
elementary
first just make a
curriculum.
motion to add an item to the agenda?
That is the item I'm adding to the agenda.
Right, but first you just add an item to the agenda, then if that is approved, then you state what the actual motion is.
I am.
So you want
Adding,
to add to
yes.
the agenda what topic?
To vote to add this item to the agenda, which I just defined. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, so that the motion can be recorded in the minutes, and so to say, to add to the agenda that which I just defined would not be clear in the minutes. So could you say what the curriculum is that you wished to get earlier review, and that would be the topic?
ELA and math elementary curriculum.
So your motion is to add to the agenda an earlier review of the ELA curriculum.
ELA and math curriculum.
Math is already coming up this spring, correct?
Correct.
So
And
we
the
don't
motion
have-
is to accelerate to this November.
you
What's the
want-
penalty if we don't do it?
Yeah, okay, so you
What's
want
the
to accelerate.
penalty? There's no penalty. I'm asking if the
You
board
wish-
would want to accelerate it.
Yeah,
It's
you
a
wish
simple
motion
question.
to accelerate both the ELA and
Correct.
Point of
the,
clarification.
Both.
math to the agenda as a topic for discussion.
Correct.
Thank you. Is there a second
I'll second that, but I have a point of clarification.
on the motion?
Yes, and actually on the comment. Dr. Tuttle, what do you mean by what's the penalty? I didn't understand your question.
Well, no.
Well, let's do
On-
this first, then we can discuss it.
On the motion to add to the agenda, do you have a clarification on what the motion is to add to the agenda?
Let's do it procedurally, then I'll.
No, I think this
So
is a pretty
is
simple
the
question.
board aware of the actual motion that has been moved and seconded? I'll have the secretary read it so that there's clarity.
The motion is to add an item to the agenda to accelerate an earlier review of the ELA and math elementary curriculum to November.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fine.
Mr. Llewellyn, is that correct?
Could you read it one more time, please? To add,
To add an item to the agenda for an earlier review of the ELA, to accelerate an earlier review of the ELA and math elementary curriculum to November.
I think it should be saying to add, to discuss. We need it to discuss. We're going to add an item to the agenda to discuss accelerating. Correct?
Okay,
That's
that
what I think
Mrs.
we need
Lou
to-
McCormick
Mrs.
didn't
Lou
say that,
McCormick, I
though.
think that you should insert the word to discuss.
That's fine.
So I'll have you read it again and have Mrs. Lou McCormick confirm that that's her actual motion.
The motion is to add an item to the agenda to discuss acceleration of review of the ELA and math elementary curriculum to November.
Clarity among the board, and if there is, then comments on the motion to add to the agenda. Any discussion from board members not on the topic, but to add an item to the agenda as described? Mr. Convertito, followed by Mr. Fattabine.
I'm unclear as to the motion, and with all due respect to Mr. Llewellyn, I think you've done Ms. Lou McCormick a disservice, because the way I interpret that motion is to add a discussion item, not a voting item. And my understanding from Ms. Lou McCormick's comment is that she wants a motion that in November we will have a review of the ELA and math curriculums.
That is correct.
So you don't want a motion to discuss that, you want a motion to put it on.
Yes, a motion to put it on. That is the intent. So if it's not clear, if you interpret his wording otherwise, then
So
we
I will-
understand the point.
So redact the discuss. I
Okay.
thought we had to discuss it before we could vote it, but that's fine.
Is that acceptable to the motion maker,
That's fine to me, as long as it's clear
Seconder?
to all members of the board.
to the seconder?
Perfect, yep, thank you.
The
Thank you for
motion
clarification.
belongs to the board once it's been stated, so is there any objection by other board members to that redaction of those two words? Seeing none, so that's the motion on the table. Mr. Fattabine.
I think there was some comment that the normal review cycle would bring this item up in the spring.
One of the items, math.
One of the math items. Do you know when the second half, the England Chamber Arts would come up for review?
It's scheduled for the following year.
The following year?
Mhm.
Which would that make it 2 years of implementation? Is that the normal review cycle after 2
5.
years?
It'll be more than that.
5.
It'll be 5.
Well,
Several of these were done in pieces. They weren't all approved at once, so you've got some parts being implemented for different amounts of time. So we're phasing it in, so as the staff doesn't be taken away from other work.
right, but I guess what I thought I understood was that there was introduced last year a interim review process where 2 years after the implementation of the curriculum, you'd have, after that 2-year period, a sort of update as to where we are and how it's going prior to the normal review cycle over the 5-year period. So I guess my comment would have been that certainly if the math curriculum was coming up in the spring, and that was a normal review cycle, with the new implementation of a interim review, then I would have just gone with the interim review cycle as it had been implemented.
Again, on the agenda, on the motion, which is to add an item to the agenda as opposed to debating the essence of the purpose of the agenda, of Mrs. Lou McCormick's purpose. Mr. Llewellyn.
My notes from the comments made earlier was that the ELA curriculum was approved 3 years ago, and now it'll be another 2 before it's reviewed, so that's a total of 5. So I'd make a friendly amendment to the motion to drop the math portion and focus on accelerating just the ELA, since that's 2 years out, and it will have been in implementation for 5 years before review.
Can I just respond to that?
Well, first, the question's been asked, will you amend your motion? And so how about can you first give the chair an indication whether you'd be willing to consider the friendly amendment that Mr. Llewellyn?
I am considering it, but I'd like to have further comment on this before I say yes or no.
Okay, so therefore, your suggestion is not accepted at the moment. Do you have a comment on the motion to add an item to the agenda?
No, it remains the same in the rationales because, as Mr. Fattabine had pointed out, we had agreed to have an interim review at least 2 years after the curriculum has been approved. It's been 2 years, I think, plus since the elementary math curriculum has been implemented, and it's been 2 years plus since the elementary ELA has been implemented, and therefore, if we wait even further, it will be far gone. Way too much time will have occurred before we have had a chance to examine and decide if things are going as desired or if we should be having a discussion on the direction that it's heading. And therefore, I think an update sooner rather than later is really best for the district, rather than waiting for 5 years and possibly 3 or 4 years in
And
total.
that's your rationale for adding this item to the agenda?
Correct.
Any other comments from people who wish to add something to the, regarding this motion to add to the agenda?
Just one very quick correction. The ELA was not 3 years ago. I don't know if through the chair to Dr. Boyce, if that was, because first of all, I believe it was with this board that we did the ELA, so that has to have been within the past less than 2 years.
Elementary.
Right, but we now do K through 12. We're not doing them in parts anymore. That's part of the recognition of the work of the vertical alignment. We're doing it as a K through 12 examination. And so the secondary portion of this was within
I
the last
misspoke.
20,
I
22
misspoke. I
months.
just checked with Mr. Chiapetta in the audience. It was 1 year ago.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so can I stay again on the item to add an item to the agenda as opposed to debating the thing? Can I get a final comment, and then we'll act on whether to add this item to the agenda? Mr. Patton?
I just want to say that I'm not in favor of adding items to agendas in general where the staff does not have ample time to prepare for such a discussion. So to have an item up for, to add on to it, to add an item to an agenda that not only would be discussed but would be voted on doesn't make any sense. So I'm not in favor of adding.
Okay, any other final comments that
Point of
board members wish
clarification.
to make? I have one. Do I have anybody else that wishes to make a comment on adding an item to the agenda? Mr. Llewellyn, you get the final comment.
According to the June 2012 minutes, the ELA curriculum pre-K to 5 was voted on and approved on June 12th, 2012. So I don't know how it was 1 year ago unless there was
It was I'm
one-
sorry, secondary.
Okay, and I thought what we had talked about was elementary.
I'm talking about
So
elementary,
motion's for
not
elementary.
secondary.
So the motion, I believe, is to add an interim review of what has
Mr.
been in place
Llewellyn,
for 3 years.
I'd like to have the secretary read the motion so that the board knows that it's...
Sure.
This is the official motion as opposed to how you may remember it. Did you have any other final comment, and then I'll have the secretary read the motion?
Once you read the motion, I'll decide if I have a final comment. Thank you.
You have a final comment based on the way the motion's read?
I might.
Okay. I would clarify to the board that this board and prior boards had been adopting curriculum in chunks of K2 or 3-5 or whatever, and the problem of making sure there's consistency from K to 12 comes up. The staff had said that their review, we'd like to make a review of the K-12 curriculum on a methodical basis, and that methodical basis is laid out into the budget book that this board got last January. So I am also not in favor of this simply because I think that the systematic way that we're laying out how to review the K-12 curriculum at various levels is the proper way to go. Could you read the motion?
To add an item to the agenda to accelerate an earlier review of the ELA and math elementary curriculum.
Mrs. Lou McCormick, that's correct? The motion as you...
I think that's fine, and I do want to reflect that the whole point of this is that I believe we need to review things with more frequency and more urgency.
Thank you. Do you have a question on the way the motion is worded?
As a seconder, no. Pre-K to 5, I believe, is elementary. Am I misunderstanding something? That's, I guess, to you, Mr. Dwyer.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Elementary is defined as pre-K to 5, correct?
Elementary schools are...
So the minutes I read from 2012 says that the elementary was approved in 2012, so it'll be 3 years, it'll be 5 years. So I guess my vote in support of this is that we are going to be waiting 7 years to see if what we implemented back when the board discussed a 2-year review as being reasonable is now being pushed into this construct of K to 12 for alignment. We're asking for an interim review of the K to 12 to see how we're faring.
Yes, thank you for your clarification. No other comments? It's a voting item to the public. Does anybody have a comment on on adding to the agenda, not on the topic itself, but on adding to the agenda this topic? Seeing no one coming forward, are we ready to vote?
I would like to come forward. We're in the middle of a presentation.
Yes, I know it, but there is a motion on the table. please.
I would agree that adding an agenda
Could you
items.
state your name and...
Monique Sudikoff, 472 Lockwood Road. I would agree that adding agenda items is an inappropriate use of this board's time. Ms. Lou McCormick, you were not here for the public comment earlier because you came late, but this is the continued misuse of the public's time for inappropriate policy, silly discussions, and the public in Fairfield is tired of it, and you need to be aware of that.
Anybody else wish to come and comment on the motion?
I got a point of order.
Yes?
Microphone.
Did not the new bylaws that were passed only permit agenda items to be on a public comment? This is not an agenda item yet?
To answer Mr. Fatabean's question, the phrase is, the public with regard to agenda items as proposed or amended that the board will be discussing and/or will be acting upon by vote. If you read that strictly, you could say that this item is not on the agenda, but there is a vote to put it on the agenda. And so does the public get a right to vote on the adding it to the agenda?
They don't get a right to vote, they get a right to comment on it.
And that's the question. So that's why I invited people, because it's a
right.
voting item.
Until it's on the agenda.
Until it's
my
on the agenda,
understanding.
that's correct. A strict reading of that could very well say, but unless you want to, I've allowed one, I'll allow the second one, unless you wish to challenge the ruling of the chair. Fair enough. Hopefully, you will be the only speaker, and this won't continue. In terms of the challenge to the bylaws,
I promise to be
please
brief.
state your name and address.
Suzanne Miska, Rygate Road. I disagree with the last person who spoke. I think adding an agenda item is important, especially if we're asking for transparency and accountability. And that's, in my position as a taxpayer and parent, is all that this board member is asking. Now, whether you choose to go in that direction is up to you, but to me, if an agenda item is to allow for further clarification and ability to look at data that's on a curriculum affecting children that you have an oversight to, I think anytime you can open up accountability and transparency, it should be done. On the other side, do I think it could be conducted in a more positive manner? Yes, I do. But that said, I think anytime you're asking for that, as a taxpayer and parent, I want you to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to the board. Is the board ready for vote? I remind the board that it takes...
I have a question.
we don't answer questions, but Mr. Fatabean, do you wish to continue to object
Since
or
the
not?
chair opened the door, I don't want to close it.
Fair enough. When members of the public speak, we don't answer, we don't have a dialogue
Okay.
back and forth. Please state your name and address.
Okay, Gina Lujay, Sherwood Farm Road. I'm just wondering if accelerating the curriculum, the review of the curriculum would actually lead to quicker changes. My thought was that most curriculum work is done during the summertime, and I'm not sure if rushing into a review when you've already had it planned for the entire year would accelerate change, which might be the goal here. So that was just.
Thank you. Back to the board for vote. Does the board understand the motion that is in front of you? Okay. All in favor of adding this item to the agenda, please raise your hand. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mr. Fatabean, Mr. Llewellyn, all opposed? Mr. Patton, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, abstain. Ms. Donna Carnell abstains. The motion fails. So back to the presentation. I'm sorry that we interrupted you for the moment.
Presentation's over. We're on board Q&A.
I'm sorry, yes. Well, retake your seats. Any other questions and/or comments from the board? Mr. Convertito.
Through the chair, either to Dr. Title or Dr. Boyce or Mr. Cummings, I have two questions, and so I'll phrase the first one. We've heard a lot and we've read a lot in the paper about how the CMT is substantially different than the SBAC and so forth. Can you give us just an overview of the basic differences in the two tests?
Want to take it?
Go ahead.
Well, I'll start. You can. The SBAC is aligned to the Common Core standards. The test itself is designed in a manner that's called adaptive. So when students take it on the computer, they're constantly, if they get a question right, they're given a more difficult question, well, until the test seeks their level. So it's, some of the questions as a result are very challenging. The reading is more rigorous than it was on the SAT. The math is very much performance-based. It's a totally different type of test than the CMT and CAPT were in terms of, I would say, rigor, level of difficulty, and just the structure of the test itself.
The only thing I would add is that the focus from the CMT to the SBA tests, in the CMT, a lot of the questions on the ELA side, for example, were asked readers to bring their thinking to the assessment. Into the SBA ELA assessment, it's more to interpret the work of the original writer as somebody reads it. So it's more about the student's ability to truly comprehend what was written or what they have read. In math, the greatest fundamental difference, I think, is the impact of multi-step problems, which require students to bring perhaps a number of math understandings to a single problem, rather than simply bring back numbers or to do computation. The level of work that students are required to do is more complex, and they have to trace their thinking through a problem.
So my follow-up to that is, and given that time and resources are limited, why do we waste our time trying to compare it to CMTs? Is it just to try and placate a public opinion? Because my concern is this: going forward, we're not even going to have this test in the 11th grade, okay? And I would hate to see us invest all this time analyzing data that will be absolutely useless to us in 6 months. So that being said, I am concerned about the anomaly at Ward, and I'm curious as if the if we get the PSAT test from the 11th graders, would that be an indicator to make sure that's just an anomaly? It's just sort of a fail-safe.
We can certainly look at PSAT results. The thing to keep in mind is this coming year, we're going to the daytime PSAT, and all 10th and 11th grade students will take it. In the past, not all of them took it. And so you had, you're not comparing all of the students in one high school to all of the students in the other. You're comparing the ones who opted for it to the ones who opted for it. So this year, when we give the PSAT in school, we'll have another good indicator and comparison, yes.
I want to comment on the CMT. You're right. CMT is going the way of the dinosaur, with the exception of the science, although that eventually will morph into something else. The real challenge in looking at results is somebody says, well, our result's good. The first question is, well, compared to what? And historically, what we've done for the board, and you got some charts from me a couple of years ago that showed the whole length. We've often looked at our growth over time. Or we've looked at cohorts of kids over time and seen their growth. We showed you a chart that showed the percentage of kids achieving in advance going up as kids went through the years. We've always looked at how have we done compared to how we've previously done. That's essentially unavailable this year. And so this was the best proxy we could come up with, because if we say, well, you know, the one thing we have that the state produced for us is the state average. Well, we're always above the state average. And it's not a great feat in Fairfield to say we're above the state average. So we tried to get an effort of, you know, are we above the state average by about as much as we've always been? That was sort of the rationale for it, but it's not something that we would do going forward. 11th grade is going to be completely out the window, you're right. That's you know, but we do know, and the more we research it, and we see the live new SAT, the new SAT is supposed to be aligned to the same standards as the Common Core. And so analyzing the results of the math at the secondary level could be fruitful, except for I have grave concerns that particularly at Ward, it doesn't represent the true learning and knowledge of those students. And so I think the whole high school thing is up in the air. I agree with that. So anyway, that's why it was in there. It's just really hard in the first year of a test to come up with what's the right comparison. And that's what we were trying to do. Really isn't a PR thing. Actually, when I suggested it to him, I had no idea how it was going to come out. And there it is. So that's why it's there.
Mike, and I appreciate that input, but what I don't want us to do is to try and beat this to death and make it say something that it may or may not say, because we don't have the statistical information or ability to analyze it. And I don't want to waste resources doing that, knowing that it's not going to be there next year. Okay, and we know we're going to have the SAT. We'll have the PSATs in the fall.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so, that's my concern, is I don't want to waste a lot of administrative and man-hours trying to figure out what this means when what you're trying to do is come up with some algorithm that may or may not be correct for 1 year's set of data.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Convertito? No. Mr. Llewellyn, I'll go back and forth, Mr. Llewellyn, Mr. Patton, and then Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Thank you very much. A couple of brief questions. One is, do we have strand-level information here, or is the information that's been presented to the board the sum total of everything the district received from the state?
No, we have a tremendous amount of information we have yet to go through. They call them claims. They've changed the name. We still have that to go through. We still have the free and reduced lunch subgroup to look at. The state did not give us that in an easy format. So we still have a tremendous amount of work to do to dive into this. And part of it, I'm not going to use this as an excuse, but the access to the data is different for us than it was on the CT reports. And so we're also having to determine how best to pull out this information.
Okay, thank you. And then, I too, like Mr. Convertito, I'm interested in understanding what is driving that discrepancy at Warden. That's probably, somewhere in that claims data. And then the other one was, you had said you were analyzing the impact of tenured on the results kind of by class. So I'm wondering when you're going to have the opportunity to report back to the board kind of your findings on those two, which I think, most members of the board as well as townspeople would want to understand.
That would be determined. I think that's one of the things that we look at, and I think those are just examples of questions that, as we look to be responsive to the data and to determine what our next steps are in order to make sure that all of our students are achieving successfully, we have to look at the factors that are, impacting classroom instruction and how we would go about adjusting for those factors.
Okay. So do we, Dr. Title, through the chair to Dr. Title, will we be expecting some analysis being presented back to the board at some point?
Well, through the chair, since you say it that way, I think the answer is that they have a lot more analysis to do, and I think it would be premature to suggest a target date for when they can come back until they've had a chance to analyze it and find out what schedule they could be on.
Then I guess
Title, do you have a
to
comment?
Dr. Title.
I don't have a timetable for that. I think the questions for further study that they both identified on the memo are a jumping off point. I think there could be others that they have to dig into once that gets there. So I can't tell you when we might be able to get that kind of work done. It's just also new. The access to it is new. And I know that, speaking to the headmaster at Ward, Mr. Ebling, he's planning to run some focus groups with some students to try to get a handle on what's going on there. You just look at the percentage of kids in level 1 at Ward on the math, and you realize that, there's clearly something going on there that's just not keeping with any other data that we have. And I can't give you a timetable, but when we get closer to it, I'll let you know.
You have another question?
Can you clarify? Yeah, I do have some more, thank you. Can you clarify what you meant by jumping off point?
Well, I think you start with, data often presents you with more questions than answers.
Okay.
And you start down a path, and you try to come up with hypotheses, and you try to investigate further.
Okay.
And depending on what you find, you may take you to in a different direction. You might hit a dead end, or it might take you deeper. And you can tie yourself up in knots doing this. So what we want to be able to do is to move as quickly as possible in terms of what can we do as quickly as possible to identify the areas where kids didn't do as well as they did in some other areas, and to try to build that into school and departmental improvement plans. So you just never know where the data analysis is going to take you, is kind of what I'm saying. You start off with these 4 or 5 questions that could lead you in a number of different directions.
Okay, I think the ward one is not off point. I think that that's something that everyone here pointed out, including you in your memo. So I think that's one that should come back to the group pretty quickly. In point of clarification on your comment earlier about opting out, last Thursday we had a CES meeting where the Connecticut Commissioner of Education came down. Students who opted out did not count in the scores. They were out of the numerator and the denominator, so they had no impact. The kids who came up but didn't check in, so to speak, or checked out, they will obviously have an impact, but not the ones who truly opted out.
Right, they don't opt out. However, I just want to clarify that what that means is you didn't really test the full census of kids.
Correct.
What you now have is a sample of kids. And what you don't know is the sample of kids you tested truly representative of the full census of the student body? Is there something about the kids who decided to opt out, were those your higher performing kids or your lower performing kids? No one really knows. So if, for example, in a particular school, there was a large opt-out population, but those were, say, the really high-achieving kids who, because they were taking AP, didn't want to deal with this, then that particular school, their scores might have been lowered by that. Or you could have another school where there's a high opt-out, real opt-out, but those could have been, maybe in that community, the kids who were scared by the test. The families didn't want the kids to take it because it was so difficult. In that case, the number of opt-outs would artificially make those scores look better.
Correct.
So the fact that they don't count, to me, does not mean the data is valid. I just think it raises a lot of questions about who opted out, and I think that has a large impact if a significant percentage of kids opted out.
And we should be able to determine that for our own students.
We could well, we know who physically showed up and who opted out. What I'm talking about is when you see a high school, this is mostly an 11th grade problem across the state. You see a high school where, say, 50% of the kids took the test. That was their participation rate. You have no idea whether or not that 50% is representative of the full student body there, or whether that is some sort of anomaly. Either way. And there's no way for us to know at that school what happened. So I think it just makes comparisons where there is huge amounts of actual opt-out extremely difficult, because you don't know the nature of the students who actually opted out. So even though the scores don't count, doesn't mean the results are still representative of the whole student.
Okay. And then one of the other things for follow-up when you do your analysis would be that although our AP enrollment is up, our number of students achieving 3, 4s, and 5s, especially the 4s and 5s, is down on a percent basis, I believe, from last year. And it would be good to understand, is that a universal issue or is that not? I ran my eyes across the numbers. I think it's isolated to certain areas and it's not universal. But that's something that if you want to look into, I think that gives us a huge opportunity to pull a few levers and get those grades right back up where they were. Thank you.
Mr. Llewellyn? Mr. Patton?
Before the presentation or the subject got derailed for a bit, I was going to say that Mr. Convertito read my mind in terms of comparing the CMT with the SBA scores, of which when I read this earlier this week, I was confused because I couldn't figure out how to translate the numbers back and forth. So without beating a dead horse, on that comparison tables 14, 15 there, through the chair to, I guess, either Dr. Boyce or Mr. Cummings, are these, the numbers on those tables, the comparison tables, are they percentages? Are those the scores that the kids achieved? The only thing that I can obviously figure out is the percentage points difference between, the Fairfield and the state for the SBA and Fairfield and the state for the CMT tests, and is that percentage lower or higher? But in terms of the actual numbers that are in those boxes,
Right, those are percentages.
Of
Therefore,
level 4 and 5.
Oh,
Right,
that's
so
just it.
it's-
Level
see, it's-
4 and 5, that's the only thing I can
Yeah,
extrapolate
thank you.
from.
You
Yeah,
didn't make
it's
that
level
clear in
4
the
and
table.
5 for CMT, level 3 and 4 for Smarter Balanced, because that's goal and above. We're trying to mirror
Okay,
goal
so
and
it's a
above.
comparison for goal and above.
Yes, we should have labeled
That's all I
we
really
should have labeled the table percent of students achieving goal or above on CMT, percentage of students achieving meets expectations or higher on SBA.
Okay.
That would
so-
have clarified it.
So that's good, but I agree with Mr. Convertito. I don't think it's wise to keep on that comparison path, as Dr. Tull, you've pointed out to us over the last 2 years, that, you know, we're not going to really be able to have any comparison data, so hopefully this will be the last we'll really kind of beat that horse. The other question I have is something else that you mentioned, Dr. Title, in terms of when the test is going to be taken on a community or grade calendar. Is the state considering a uniform testing cycle like they did with CMT, and why are they giving such a wide range of latitude in terms of months that the test can be taken?
The availability of technology varies greatly across the state in terms of districts' capacity to get all the kids through the technology and take the test. CMT and CAP was all basically paper and pencil, so we could administer much more quickly. And in recognition of that, in the first year, they gave us the maximum flexibility. And our test coordinators and principals and people here did a great job of figuring out how to do all that. What they're and the window was 10 weeks, 12 weeks. So this year they're considering shrinking the window, but they still have to have a much wider window for this test than they do for the CMT, because it all has to do with the availability of technology. That's the simple reason.
So you're talking they're considering shortening the window for this current calendar year, the
Correct.
2016?
They have not put out the schedule yet, because they're trying to figure out what to do with it. They're trying to fly a plane that's half broken and try to fix it while they're flying it, okay? And so that's just one of many issues the state has to sort out with this monstrosity that's been created. But the big thing is the technology. I don't know if is there more to it than that? I don't know.
No, I mean, that really is it. And what our schools go through to schedule students into the lab or in front of a computer is a tremendous maneuvering. And it ties up the computers, and no one else is able to use them while the students are testing. But it's a huge logistical nightmare for our schools to manage.
Mr. Patton, you have other questions?
I'll only comment that it's not too late to start thinking about budget season, and don't cut the technology budget.
Thank you. Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
A few questions. First, any word on when we're getting individual scores?
September is all they've told us.
That would be the 30th, I suppose, then.
Look, and the other thing is, I'll have to
They
tell you.
didn't say what September.
Which September?
Yes.
I was just at a meeting on Friday with the commissioner and that staff, and they said September. And I will also tell you that I've been in a number of meetings, as have my colleagues, where the state has promised us to meet certain deadlines, and I don't think any of them have been met. So don't wait around checking the mailbox to see if they're there.
Well, this is the test that they promised us feedback within, I think, almost 24 hours was the first thing I got told in the
You have one
classroom.
example, yes,
Yeah.
there's one, and there's a list of 20 other promises that haven't been kept on this.
You have other questions
yes.
that can be answered, actually.
Yeah. Second one, and it gets to the point of that discrepancy. I hope the starting point for understanding that discrepancy goes to Mr. Ebling's focus groups, because I have a very definite opinion on where that discrepancy comes from, and I think it's a great deal of apathy. They know they didn't count. I mean, I would hope that, and actually, quite frankly, before the individual scores come out, so that doesn't skew someone saying, well, of course I didn't take it seriously because, you know, now that they see a score, who wants to own that? But, you know, that I hope this information is gathered first, just with that student input, because I think that's where the answer lies, with all of that other data, and to use any other time on looking at anything else before that, personally, I would not think to be a wise use of staff time. Third question was regarding the math. In your assessment, especially with the elementary school, because in comparing our elementary schools to one another, you might think of math as being, again, the solving of problems with numbers, but is SBAC far more language-based for the math test in the elementary school than the CMT?
I would say, first of all, at all levels, it's far more language-based. The CMT in the fourth generation became more language-based, and we did see, at that time, students who had difficulty with reading begin to struggle more on the math portions of the test. I think that trend is carrying over, and this is an early prediction, based more on watching individual students last year take the test than on any analysis of the data at this point. But I think that's one thing we're going to have to look at more closely to see the impact of reading difficulties on the math portions of the test.
Okay. And then last part, which is kind of the big question I had. When we look at the finite number of amount of time that our staff has, I personally just want to say that I appreciate Ms. Lou McCormick's point regarding comparison to other districts, and yet I couldn't disagree more, only in that I know, not only to Dr. Title's point about the different timing of the taking of the tests, but the seriousness with which different districts took the tests. I mean, there are districts I know of that had Saturday prep classes for the SBAC. I say that as one of the teachers of that prep class. And so it's the focus that was put on this is just so wide. I don't think, my immediate hope would be getting back to Mr. Cummings' point about let's take a look at grade by grade comparison from one school to the next. You know, looking at, because we've talked about one of the things in our district improvement plan is our resources, our teachers, and are we really seeing a correlation between years experience and performance, et cetera. I really hope that this is our time to look at ourselves, and that also gets to Mr. Llewellyn's point about the strands. I don't have personally a whole lot of use for this just holistic score. What intrigues me about the and this would also directly impact immediately the preparation for that spring SAT, which is if we pull out those strands and we find, again, I'll use easy examples, that it was the fractions that were especially decimating to scores, or the nonfiction reading component. It's in those strands that we're really going to have the impact on instruction and immediate delivery in terms of what the teachers are doing and informed about, and so that could be the point of emphasis, especially leading into that November 3rd professional development led by the College Board, that we know where our weaknesses were. I'm very keenly interested in that, and I do hope we get some follow-up with the board on what you've discovered from that, because I think it'll be very interesting and obviously will be very relevant to that curriculum review. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to the district-wide initiatives so that we have enough time to talk about that. Is there any final comment that people wish to make? I only see one hand up. Ms. Carnell, you get the last comment.
Through the chair to Mr. Cummings, welcome to the district and to a Board of Ed meeting. I just have a question, and this may be in line with trying to follow these stats year to year. But on table 4, and I'm just going to pick on Dwight, it says the percentage level 3 and 4 is 64. Are you with me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure you got that. And if you flip the page to the 4th grade, 3rd grade or 4th grade, the percentage level is 98.
Yes.
That seems like an amazing increase. Again, is that an anomaly, or what would cause such an increase? I mean, it's great that the score went up. So my question would be, why can't we do it in every school? But do we have any idea what would cause something like that?
Well, again, we're just getting the numbers, and we've only begun to essentially start to peel this onion. But I think the first caution I'd say is these are two different groups of students. The grade 3 students were the students in grade 3 last year at Dwight, and the grade 4 were currently in grade 5. So these two groups of students are a year apart. I don't want to take anything away from a 98 percentage point performance. It's a tremendous performance. At the same time, I think that it would be a disservice to the grade 3 teachers to say somehow that they did less well. Those are the things that we have to really look at to see what's causing it. You know, and again, based more on past experiences in trying to make meaning and to grow from CMT performance. It's a number of factors that lead to these types of performance levels. And to Dr. Title's point earlier, the makeup of that class, considering that there's not an awful lot of students, if you think there's 56 students in the grade 3 last year, 46 in the grade 4 when they took the test. At Dwight, probably more than any other school, every single child carries a greater weight of those scores than they do, say, at Sherman or Osborne Hill or Stratfield. So those are the things we have to look at. Who are the students taking the test? What can we do? What learning challenges do they face? And how do we remediate them?
No, and I think that's true. You know, and to Dr. Title's point, there's so much testism. I don't want to use his analogy about flying, because about flying the plane broken. But how granular will you look at these scores? And when can we expect to understand when you start pulling them apart?
Well, we'll look at them from a number of different levels. I mean, I think, you know, the most important thing for me at this point is to begin to work with the principals who have a far more deeper understanding of their building, the students and the staff within their building. And as Dr. Boyce said, the same conversations that are going to take place at the middle and high level about with the principals about what they need to do in their buildings is the conversations we'll have with the elementary principals. The great opportunity comes before us now as we move to the school improvement planning process to link the scores and our questions about those scores to action steps. It's not about, the scores are only evidence, potential one piece of evidence around what's working and not working. And as I said at the very outset, I think the overwhelming evidence right now is that the majority of things are really working very well in Fairfield. But our continuing quest is to make sure that they're working better and better for all students. And so we use those scores really as a departure point for further questions and analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yes.
One more.
Dr. Boyce, thank you for this crash course. Just to understand it, because I'm not really sure that I do, we just got to look at it when we sat down. If you can explain in terms of the AP enrollment, the AP test taken, the number of students who took the test, the 3+, and I believe this is only grade 12. We didn't cover grade 11 in these stats at all?
No, this historically is how it's been portrayed here, and I don't know why, because I wanted to give it to you over 5 years. It was set up this way, and so I didn't change the table. So it was always with grade 12, but certainly we have students other than grade 12 students in AP courses. The AP enrollment are the total number of students taking AP courses. So some students take more than one, so they'd be counted more than once. Number of AP tests taken. Not all students who take an AP course take the test. So that would actually be the number of AP tests that a student would actually sit down and take. Again, it could be multiple tests per student. And the number of students who took an AP test tells you exactly how many students took at least one AP test. And then the score of 3 or above, which typically is the score we look at. Universities have the right to, if they want to, give students credit for certain scores. They don't have to. But typically they'd be looking at scores 3 or above for credit, if they're going to give it at all. And then the total students in grade 12. So that's historically the way it's been reported. I think many years ago they used to do a report in the Washington Post where they actually they based an index on the total number of students in grade 12, and it was reported out that way. So that's probably historically why that line has always been there.
We probably should just take it out.
We'll take it out.
I think it's just confusing.
No, I think you should add it.
But I think what happens is the College Board, when they're looking at district performance, they do use a metric of what percentage of students achieve 3 or higher. We also can look at other score points, 4 and higher, 5 and higher, and so forth. But that's the one that they report out publicly. But the total students in grade 12, this represents all AP enrollment, not just 12th grade enrollment.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make.
Okay,
yes.
thank you. That was helpful.
Yes.
can we change this chart and maybe break it down a little more? Is that possible going
Certainly.
forward?
I'm going to blame Dr. Rosado, since he's here this evening, for setting up this chart.
In case anybody doesn't know who he is.
Right. I continued it in the same format, but we can change it however we want to.
Yeah, maybe, adding a little more to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll move on, but I'd like to make one. Mr. Convertito has a comment, then I'll make my comment.
I have one last comment, actually. You can blame Ms. Canelli because she reminded me of it. When you break all of these down into their now called claims and so forth, my big concern is that as we go into the future and develop more curriculums, that we're going to be developing curriculums, or the tendency may be to develop curriculums that match up with those claims. And my concern, and maybe Dr. Tully can address it within the district improvement plan or so forth, is how do we keep our curriculum rich without having it designed to be this blueprint set up by the SATs?
Curriculum is based on standards, and we have to follow the standards established by the state. So we don't design a curriculum for the assessment. We design a curriculum to determine what we want students to know or be able to do, and the assessment measures that, but there's always more in the curriculum than that. They're measuring certain pieces of our curriculum. We do much more and go beyond this, but we would never design a curriculum based on an assessment.
I guess my comment would be that the value in looking at different strands with sub-strands within it is to see how well your written curriculum is, how well are the kids achieving it. So if we find out, that in science that kids are on the inquiry strand not doing as well as they could, but they're doing really well in some other strand, then it's not really necessarily a curriculum issue. It could be an instructional issue. It could be, we don't know what the issue is, but we want to, again, it's a clue. It's not necessarily the answer. So it doesn't require a curriculum change. It may be a matter of resources to enhance that curriculum, or maybe we have to look at how we're teaching it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a curriculum change brewing. We don't want to do that.
I guess my question is, and it piggybacks on most of this conversation of outside comparisons, outside districts. To me, if I want to make sure that my district is outperforming somebody else, I'm going to make sure that all of those strands are in my curriculum, and they're going to be, I'm going to be teaching to that test from September to June. And I want to make sure that we as a district don't move in that we're not moving in that direction.
No.
Thank you. I would only reiterate Mr. Convertito's comment. I hope the staff, and I know they will learn what you can from this first-year test. But I would also agree that a lot of time trying to compare this with other tests that had different methodology, done on different time frames, it'll be 2 or 3 years before we get some consistent, comparable results. And so the idea of comparing us with other districts or even school to school, I'm not sure is valuable to us. We ought to use it to say, where can we learn from this? And the other thing I would comment on is that, really for the parents, is that the more teachers or parents or boards talk about these high-stake tests, the more we give emphasis to these tests are the only thing that's important. And there's a lot more than just these tests in evaluating a student's performance. So I hope that we always consider this in balance. We'll move on to the discussion of the 2015-2016 district-wide initiatives, and I turn the meeting over to Dr. Title.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Cummings, for your first effort in front of the board. Dr. Boyce is an old hand at this. Actually, what Mr. Dwyer said is an excellent sort of segue into the district-wide improvement initiatives, because one of the features of the district improvement plan that you approved unanimously was that the set of indicators we're going to use to judge the success of the district is much broader than simply the SBAC scores or any standardized measures. In fact, one of the pieces to the plan I'm most proud of is the fact that this board was willing to embrace many different measures of assessing the quality of the education our students getting, and that's a reflection of the mission. The mission of the board is much broader than scores on standardized tests can represent. So when we last left this plan in July, the board had approved a total of 63 specific actions, with the understanding that many of them were multiple year, and that not all of them would be started in the first year, and that some of them would be more doable in year one than others. So after a considerable amount of review, and we really see this as our priority work for the year, implementing the plan that you approved. I would like to point out that this is a very aggressive list, but this is the work the board passed as its priority work for the year. And I would also like to point out that as we move through the year, as things pop into anybody's head that say, oh, I think the district ought to go off and examine this and examine that and examine this program, and I just went to a conference and I think you all ought to look into this. Remember, something on here that wouldn't get done. This is similar to the initiatives that you've seen before. It's broken out the same way by our 4 core strategies. Most of them apply to some place in the district improvement plan. So under instructional program, you'll see a number of items, and every single one of them is part of the district improvement plan. Where it's more than a 1-year item, we point that out. Obviously, these are all year 1. So, for example, just looking at number 1, that plan in the district improvement plan is to actually develop and implement a world language program at the elementary level. Year 1 is develop, and year 2 would be implement. So this is year 1, and there's a reference to what it is. And then I subtotal under each of our core strategies how many specific actions we're working on this year. So what that 9 means that of all of the specific actions in the district improvement plan, we're starting work on 9 of those. Then we go on to teams, and we're working on 7 having to do with teams. And then if you flip over to leadership capacity, we're working on 4. When you get into resources, you'll see that while we're working on 10 that do relate to the district improvement plan, there are a number of very important initiatives, work that's going on that are not specifically tied to the district improvement plan. And so this is, you'll see a not applicable there in the far right. So numbers 30 through 35 are not referencing anything in the district improvement plan, but they represent a potentially substantial amount of work on the staff's part or the board's part. And as we've done before, anyone that has an asterisk next to it, it means it's coming back for board approval. It doesn't mean that something else might not come for board approval, depending on, like, number 30, we don't know where that's going. Right now, that's under Explore. And that was written back under the old history of that. So I kept the format the same, but I tied it in so that the initiatives that the district, for the most part, are undertaking are initiatives that are directly tied into the board-approved district improvement plan. If something was a very high-cost item, potentially a high-cost item, we couldn't put it in this year because obviously this year's budget's done. And so something might have been not put in the first year for that reason. We had to look at the various workload of the people who would be involved in implementing these. And we couldn't overwhelm somebody. So there's only so much curriculum leaders and our Director of Elementary Education and Secondary Education can do in a year, and these are very challenging to do. If we thought it was very timely, possibly even urgent, then obviously that would go into year one. An example of that would be the professional learning on teaching in the block. Clearly, that's something that needs to take place right away. We're in it. So I'm not going to go through them all. I will say that despite my best efforts with my staff, they have, in my opinion, bitten off more than they probably can chew. But we promised to give us our best effort. A number of these items will come back before you. Some of them will look familiar because they're a continuation of previous work. It's not all new work. It's continuing work that has been ongoing for the last 5 years. You'll notice that in data teams, instructional rounds, and improvement plans. We're just trying to do it better. So I think I'll stop at that point and entertain any questions or clarifications about these. We're just at the beginning of working on these, so there isn't a whole lot of detail in terms of exactly what is that going to look like, because we're just at the very beginning of the implementation, but I can do my best, or some of my trusted associates out there would love to come up and help.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Thank you. My favorite single item in the entire district improvement plan, that high school survey, is that just something it's going to take place, but it doesn't need to be listed here, or?
The high school survey.
Of graduates, sorry.
The graduate survey is, that's actually not an improvement initiative. That is a student performance indicator, okay?
Wait, so you're talking about the survey
Graduate
of
follow-ups.
graduates?
Yes.
Graduates and the analysis thereof.
That's actually not on here because it actually is not listed. That was an assessment we're doing, and that is happening. That has already gone out. Actually, it went out, I don't know, spring, summer. They're still following up on it. Not sure when we're going to get results, but that isn't actually in as a specific action. But it was one of the data points we promised to get at least a baseline out of this year. And so as part of that work, that is happening. So I don't want you to think it's not.
Okay.
And once we get the results back, then we'll have some baseline data to share with the board, and then we'll be able to set some targets based on that.
Okay.
It's happening.
And your question is a good time to remind the board and the public that these are not the only 35 items that our staff are working on.
Right.
They work on a lot of items that are for school improvement that don't make it to this list.
Okay. Then for number 5, I do have a number of questions. If at some point, Mr. Dwyer, if you prefer that somebody else take a turn and see if somebody else covers my others.
I don't see any hands up at the moment, but if I do, then I'll...
Okay. My question about number 5, developing the comprehensive transition program. Are you doing, I mean, one, of course, I like the idea, but I was wondering if there was some feedback that was kind of setting the direction on this. That you had received feedback that something either was going well, was not going well, and so that's a special point of focus there.
I think something that we've heard a lot from parents on has been concerns about the transitions from grades 5 to 6 and 8 to 9. And we're just starting down that path of trying to understand what these concerns are, and also to see whether or not the student performance data bears that out. So I think it was something in terms of consistency, vertical consistency in our program. The instructional program introduction in italics talks about instructional program delivered across schools and grade levels. That's something that I think is something that every district tries to work on. And so we've just started examining what practices can we put in place that will make that better. and we have principals working on that now. I will say that one of the ideas that they're going to work on, that I've heard from several principals, is, at least as a way to get an idea of what's happening, is they're going to probably be involved in some vertical rounds where elementary and middle school teachers, say, work together and visit each other's classrooms, and middle and high school teachers. We already did some of that. So I think you're going to see a tie into that to the vertical teams, number 12, to conduct instructional rounds as another piece there. So that's kind of where that came from, but that's still in its infancy.
Okay, you just knocked off another one of my questions, so I was asking about number 12, if that was being focused on number 5.
So how about
thank you.
2 more, if you could, and then I'll
Okay.
move to the other side of the table.
I was wondering if you could tell us more about, and I know we've heard about it in the past, but now that it's actually listed here, a little bit more about the middle school advisory program, number 12. Excuse me, number 10.
Well, I'd love to have somebody talk about that. I mean, I'll do it, but you're tired of listening to me, so who wants to give it a try? I guess we have Meg and Gary as potential
Hey,
takers.
Maggie,
Maybe they'll do it together.
Gary will sit next to you, and this time he won't be thrown under the bus.
Yes. We may need to separate
Would
them.
never do that to Dr. Rosado.
Right.
I'll give you the big picture answer first. The state does have a requirement for student success plans to be in place 6 through 12, and part of that planning is to have advisory programs for students in the middle and the high schools. The high schools have already started to work on that. The middle schools will be doing that this year. They want to do a little bit of work on their schedule first in order to figure out how to do that. And the advisory does a lot of different things, but I'll let Dr. Rosado talk a little bit about what he and the other 2 principals have discussed.
We have taken the opportunity to tweak our schedule a little bit in the morning so that we have some dedicated time. First part of the morning is part of homeroom, but on a periodic basis, we haven't exactly worked out how often it will happen, have an extended period of time. And the way advisory would work would be that students in a homeroom would be essentially divided into smaller groups so that a variety of adults within the building would work with them, and that they would have a go-to person, if you will, in a smaller group to help them transition through middle school and onto high school. It is part of a student success plan, the student success planning initiative as well.
Any other questions, Mrs. Maxine-Finelli? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll take 2 more, and then I'll wait for the rest of them. For number 14, I was wondering if you did have any particular point of focus, because obviously that's a very, very broad statement, or does that fit the example of where you are, that's going to be a jumping off point, and once you look at data, feedback from staff or whatever, that's when you'll pick your point of focus?
Well, so let me back up 1 second. In some cases, the initiative is listed almost exactly the way it's written in the district improvement plan.
Right.
In other cases, it may be, what are we doing on this one this year? And that's what gets written in here. This language was was wordsmithed so carefully by the board, and that it's a 2-year process, that I believe that's exactly what the board put in as its language, and it's obviously very broad in scope. And I know this is a little frustrating, but you might have remembered in July, people kept saying, on all of these, I want more details, and more details. Well, people need to work on these, and then we can give you more details. We obviously aren't a whole lot farther into this work than we are, than we were on July 8th. So it's very broad. And I don't know if Andrea's here, and so perhaps she would like to comment on that. But that is, I don't know. Well, the individual who is the
Gail Donowitz.
Gail Donowitz, is actually administrator, was transferred on her own desire into that position. So she's really not a new administrator to the district. She's new to that position, but Andrea oversees the whole ball of wax, so if you want to give us an update on that, that would be great.
We're in the process of working with that faculty on their first school improvement plan. So these are big rocks, as we call them in the district, that are being focused on. And the three major focuses are instructionally, we're looking at implementing project-based learning models, which is really an integrated learning model where kids develop, under the leadership of a faculty member, develop individual or progress projects similar to what you heard today about the History Day, where they do research and create and solve real-life problems to try to integrate their learning. So they have to learn some math, and they have to learn and create projects. So they're implementing a project-based learning component. In the area of social and emotional learning, they're focusing in on social social activism by taking on some what's the right word? I'm sorry.
Advocacy?
They're working on doing projects in the community service, that was it, projects where kids are working with different community agencies to develop real problems, to solve real problems here in Fairfield. And then lastly, they're implementing positive behavioral supports, a school-wide system of positive behavioral supports, which is a very evidence-based practice on how to create a school climate that engages students in learning. And so those are the three big rocks that are happening at the alternative high school. And as that plan fleshes out and targets are set and assessment procedures are done, then you'll get more information about that.
Those three specifics are very helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Last question was a very specific question to number 25, expanding the options for mental health support. Did you see that as being something done with existing staff, a re-examining of their positions with that, or is this, sorry, I should have realized that, pure budgetary that more staff is needed, or is this a reconfiguring of how we're doing things now?
There are actually two things happening. We've engaged with an outside vendor to provide some very intense levels of therapeutic support for small numbers of kids with very intense needs to keep them in the district. We've also realigned the school-based mental health services to concentrate on prevention rather than reaction. So we've added a layer. We've done it by transferring out-of-district placement money, and we're keeping kids in the district. We've already returned 3, and we're looking to return a couple of others during the year to pay for it.
Thank you.
One moment, Mr. Convertito. Do you mind a follow-up? No objection on that side of the table? Mr. Convertito, a follow-up on that question.
Just to follow
Mr.
up on that
Fattabine
one.
also wants to have a follow-up on that topic.
When we did the school climate survey last year, we had a cohort of kids who felt they had no foundational, or I can't remember what the term was. It wasn't support, but basically the kids that were
The
on the edge.
relationships within the building.
Right, no adult they could turn to, no, you know, that basically felt alone and alienated. Will this start to address some of those issues when you talk about prevention side?
Certainly. We're talking about the whole prevention side will be, if you remember, years ago, we saw the SRBI model on the academic side, right? So layers of intervention. It was a pyramid, if you recall the visual. This is the same visual side on the behavioral mental health side. So you see, we have a tier 1 model of mental health support that serves the needs of most of our kids. But where we're weak, or where we have been focusing attention, is at that tier 3 and tier 4, where kids are having intense needs. That right now in our past models has drawn attention away from that core of tier 1. Our hope of providing the intense services to that small, very small group, and we're talking 1 to 2% of the population, will allow the staff to focus more on prevention and student success planning, not only on the academic side, but on the building resiliency and building perseverance into kids, how to handle and cope when you meet frustration or when you meet some areas that are difficult for you socially and emotionally. So the whole focus was adding to our tiers of support, and we felt we needed to capture some more intensity of support for those kids with the very highest level of need, you know, who need daily therapeutic support versus, you know, and helping in that way.
Mr. Fattabine, again on that topic.
Yeah, I think you substantially answered my concern. My concern was that where you're expanding the options for mental health students, mental health support for students, you were providing some additional mental health support for students that didn't normally get it, not just intensifying or consolidating the ones that do get it, but the resources were being spent on including more students that may need it that have not received it in the past. And I think you've answered that, sort of the second half of trying to get
Absolutely.
preventative, not just preventative, but maybe providing services to students
Early intervention.
earlier on that may not necessarily need the intensive stuff. That was sort of what I thought the intent was of that, to service the needs of students that don't normally get the services, and not expanding the needs of the services for the students who already get the services.
Correct.
Mrs. Met, can I turn to the others, or no follow-up on that? I'll go down the line. I don't remember who raised their hand first, but Mr. Patton did, okay, then Mrs. Carnell, and then Mrs. Lou McCormick. Oh, you didn't raise your hand? Not yet. Oh, okay. Mr. Patton, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Lou McCormick.
I don't think I have any questions for Mrs. Leonardi, so.
Fantastic.
You are excused. I don't know if this is through to the chair, to Mr. Cummings, more of a comment / question to throw him back into the fire. On piggybacking off what Mrs. Maxon Kennelly was talking about with number 5 and the transition between grades, let's stay specific to grades 5 and 6. Your temporary predecessor, Mr. Rafferty, I had many conversations with him and with several 5th and 6th grade teachers over the last year or so. So in that initiative of number 5, for at least for the grade 5-6 transition, as compared to what Dr. Title was saying, it sounded more of like an emotional transition. I was looking more towards the academic transition, and what Mr. Rafford and I used to have these conversations about, as well as the teachers, was what are the 6th grade teachers' opinions on, are their students prepared from the previous year, whether it was, ELA or math are obviously the two, big targets. Is that something in terms of, more, I always forget, is it instructional rounds, Dr. Title? Is that more in terms of getting the teachers together from those 2 grades and having discussions? Is that something that's planned with this initiative, I guess is my question.
So perhaps Dr. Title may want to make an initial comment and then turn it over to Mr. Cummings.
If I understood what the question was, you're a better man than I am, so go ahead.
All right.
Was there a question?
Is there an...
It was a comment that kind of segued into a question. So
So,
the question would be,
How about, Ms.
I'm an
Patton,
equal
how about this?
opportunity-
Is there an academic orientation to this revised orientation, or is it just social?
and that will involve teachers from those grades interacting.
Yes and yes.
By the way, I would like to point out that I don't want, because one person heard it that way, maybe others did as well. I don't want to imply that my perspective on this is simply it's a matter of managing the emotions of kids as they move from 5th to 6th grade. That I think we need to look at the academic data to see whether or not, in fact, when people say, it's a really tough transition for kids between grades 5 and 6, is there some academic data that supports that? Or are there particular strands or areas of the curriculum in grade 6 that kids struggle on that we could pay better attention to in grade 5? But I don't see this as just a emotional, psychological issue. I see this as both.
I was not implying that.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear.
So
Again, in
is-
terms of the comment that led to the question, in my conversations with teachers from those grades over, let's say, the last 4 years, even before I was on the board, there would be lots of comments on both sides to say, I would love to do that, I would love to have that interaction, so we can make sure that the 5th grade teachers are doing what they need to be, and the 6th grade teachers can say, well, it would be nice if they worked a little more on this, henceforth.
So the answer is yes and yes, and perhaps you can continue your conversation with Mr. Cummings on the details of that.
I can do that later. So,
Anything else?
yeah, my other question, and I can't remember. let me just get to the next question, then you can come back, if you don't mind. This one's kind of brief.
I think it's Mrs. Gerber first, and then Mrs.
sorry.
Lou McCormick, but
But
ask your
on
question.
number 27, so we're talking about expanding the use of Infinite Campus, and I remember we talked about this use of gradebook on the elementary levels in terms of how that would be expanded. Is that more of, I guess, again, to Mr. through the chair to Mr. Cummings, is that more of a, we're not going to start, doing, ABC, D, grades in the elementary level, right? This is more of a progress kind of reporting, or maybe you could expand on that?
Certainly. And I appreciate you asking this question because I know it's a topic that is on a lot of people's minds. I think fundamentally the issue around Infinite Campus in the elementary schools, as I conceive it right now, is the issue, as you've identified, moving at the elementary level, it's a standards-based report card. So it does not translate as well in a daily or weekly update that many parents who have children at the middle school and high school are used to, this kind of continually updating of the student's average. So as we go forward to remediate this issue, one, we believe that we can use Infinite Campus more than it's currently being done to communicate student progress. But I think as we do that, we also have to work with parents in the community to have an understanding of what that progress will look like against the standards-based report card setting as opposed to conventional letter grade setting, because it is different. So that's one of the things that we will have the dialogue on, but we do know that we have to look for opportunities to make the grade book more accessible, and we have to use Infinite Campus more than we're currently using to communicate to parents.
Is that it? Mrs. Gerber?
Yeah, I guess one question I had is in regards to the school improvement plans.
The item is?
I'm sorry, number 11, all school and department improvement plans will align with the district improvement plan. I was just curious as to what the timeline was for that. Is that something that you're going to be working on all year, and with the school improvement plans being finished by a certain time, by the end of the year, by mid-year? I just wasn't clear on what that was.
Well, our conversations at this point have us working on the school and department improvement plans. We've already begun that work. The department plan really is essential that is strongly in place before the schools can begin to work on that. They have to know what the district work is going to be in order that they can align their work. But our hope is that by as we move into October, certainly by the end of October, we'd have the school improvement plans done. It's important for the school improvement plans to be completed, as the work in them should truly align to the goal setting that teachers and administrators then do.
Okay. All right,
So
great.
it's not something that they're working on all year.
Right.
They need to get it done in the fall so they
Right, I
can
thought it was the
start
fall.
implementing it.
I just
Yes.
wanted to get
Yes,
some
it's
specificity
this
as to
fall,
when.
but I don't want to be like the state and promise you a date and then
No,
not be able to meet it.
I don't need a specific date. I just wanted to have a general
fall.
idea. Okay, fall is good. Thanks. And then another question I had was number 19, the Leadership Academy module number 1. That's
Mike's off the hook on this one.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's Ms. Leonardi. So I just wanted to see, because that wasn't, I know it was a more general term in the district improvement plan.
Right,
And
so-
so I just wanted to get more information as to exactly what that Leadership Academy module number 1 was.
Module number 1 focuses in on special education, practice and policy, and procedure. So we're working with the administrators of the district, all the new administrators as well as the current administrators, to address all of the different processes related to special ed in an effort to improve the day-to-day operations of those special ed processes within the building. So that includes IDEA, 504, McKinney-Vento, any one of a number of processes that basically fall onto my desk. So I have a 6-part series that's going to be taking place throughout this fall. We finish in December. That I got feedback from the principals on what they felt they really needed in that Leadership Academy. And I'll be working on the presentation, and then there are a couple of, 1 or 2 of the days of presentation, or it's a 2-hour time frame block each time, where our special ed attorney will join us and we'll talk about some of the more in-depth case study, case analysis kind of work.
And then I guess at some point then, because this is all leadership, so this is administrators, correct?
This is all
who
of
are-
the
right.
administrators, yeah.
So at some point, is there going to be involvement from teachers at some level? That would be something that would take place?
We do
later?
that in our department meeting structures in special ed.
Okay.
So we build teacher leadership capacity there.
Right.
What we haven't been able to do over the past few years is be able to provide the leadership focus on the building principals and administrators, because their role in the special ed process is one of facilitator. They don't have to know all the answers, but they do know how to know how to facilitate through the process so that parents feel like they're part of the process, and so they can help the teams develop comprehensive programs for the kids.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I think there was one other question I had, and I'm totally not finding it now. So maybe somebody else could go, and if I find it.
I'll come back to you if you
Yeah,
find it.
thank you.
Mrs. Lou McCormick.
Okay, I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but regarding number 1, and I guess related to that is number 4, which is the World Language Program. I know inside the board's initiatives, we had specifically mentioned to develop a K through 5, just to emphasize the fact that it was supposed to be bringing it back to kindergarten and up, as opposed to a more general comment that we're implementing a program at the elementary school. Is that the intent of this as well?
You mean number 1 that says elementary school?
Yeah, it just
And
says elementary, but it
school
doesn't
is-
specifically, it kind of says it broadly, which could be 4th grade, it could be 3rd grade, but when we had discussed it, it was to bring it back to kindergarten.
Elementary school is a K-5. Both number 1 and number 4, the actual items won't necessarily be a voting item, but certainly any expansion of world language to either all of the elementary grades or a portion thereof will be made as part of a proposal for the next year's budget. And our agreement as a board is that November is when we will be discussing expanded program initiatives, which would be the world language. So at the moment, I'm not sure whether the staff can say, can they fit into the budget all of the elementary grades or not. I think that's a budget consideration item.
Right, the program, we may develop a program at the elementary level that encompasses grades K to 5, but we may not be able to implement it all at once, depending on what the priorities are of the board. But certainly the goal was to look at K to 5 and make some determinations about what would be the best to do there. But there's no guarantee that it will actually occur until we get through the whole budget process. Number 4, world language, that was a newly adopted curriculum from grades 4 through 12 that you approved last year. And so that's simply a matter, not simply, it's not simple, it's a lot of work, but implementing the curriculum is actually harder than writing it. And so, because that's a significant workload, both in world language and K-12, that's under number 4. So that's a separate issue. That's the board-approved world language curriculum for grades 4 to 12 last year. Now we have to go ahead and do it. That's what 4 is.
Right, which made me believe that number 1 was the K through 4. Because when we approved it, it was develop and implement a K through 5 world language program.
Right. So this year 1 is just to develop it. That's
Okay,
what we're
I just wanted to
working on.
clarify that the intention was to go back to kindergarten, as we had discussed.
To
during the
look
discussion.
at K to 5 and decide what we want to do with it. So we're looking at the whole elementary span, yes.
So we're not committing to kindergarten, we're just going to discuss it.
We'll see what comes out. We gave you a proposal last year.
Yeah,
if
last
you remember.
November, it was very clear.
We had it all the way down to kindergarten. It was just in the decision-making, we decided to start with 6th grade, but there was an outline of a world language program. But at that point, I also remember several board members really asking a lot of detailed questions about the elementary program, and we hadn't really developed it that much to answer those questions. So we're hoping to get a more detailed version of what you got last November, if we're going to try to move ahead with this for next year, for the next budget cycle.
Okay, my next question is regarding, back to the one that Mr. Patton had discussed, number 5. Just quickly on that comprehensive transition program, yeah, like at least this is from grade 5 to grade 6. I'm not sure about grade 8 to grade 9, but does that involve skills in like note-taking and organization? So these topics wouldn't necessarily fall into strands that might be identified within, a test, but are items that facilitate transition.
So I think the approach to this is, and I don't think we're finished with phase 1 of anything like this, is let's identify the problem first. Let's figure out what the problem is, rather than start with a solution and back our way into a problem. So what exactly are the issues at hand here? And I don't think we've come to any conclusions yet about exactly what the issues are. So if it turns out that one of the issues is that kids lack note-taking skills when going from grade 8 to grade 9, let's just say that turns out to be an issue that gets identified by the staff as a problem, then you would move to the next question is, all right, what instructional practices do we put in place, maybe not as a separate curriculum, but what would you put in place in classrooms in grade 8? Where would it fit? Where could we improve our teaching of note-taking skills in grade 8 so when they get to grade 9 we would solve the problem? So the first step is let's identify exactly what the problem or problems are that we're trying to solve. And then once we get that, then we would move to, okay, what practices are we going to put in place to solve them?
And those are meant to be developed and recommended this year, because there's no year written next to it? Is that right?
These would be developed this year, yes. Some may even be put in place this year, depends how quickly we can move on some of these things. And part of the problem identification and also possibly the problem solving is where the vertical rounds come in. So that circles back to Mr. Patton, who really did ask me a legitimate question about that. And that is that the teachers in these grades, as part of their work, would be looking at each other's practices in the different grades to see what is happening in the classroom. It's not just to sit down and chit-chat, but with a very specific focus in mind. And then based on that information, then a game plan can be developed about how to improve it. So really, I think there's 2 phases to that, problem finding and then problem solving.
And will you be presenting to the board as you find them prior to implementation, or are you going to be implementing as you go and then we get a report at the end of the year? How does that work?
We haven't thought that far ahead. We don't know what's going to come out of this. So I'm not expecting that this is the kind of thing that's going to have a major budget impact. I don't see this as a November, we're going to present this and we need a massive infusion of staff to make this better. Obviously, if there's going to be major costs involved in this, then we'd have to bring that to you very soon because we'd want to get it in next year's budget. I don't think this is the kind of thing that's going to require a lot of resources. So I don't expect that this is going to be on the docket for November the way world language would be.
Right, no, not from a budgetary perspective, just from an educational perspective, just so the public and the board knows that this is how we're addressing this concern.
Yeah, I think once we come up with something, we'll be happy to share it.
Anything else? No. You have your follow-up, yes. Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, this would be number 9, the implement professional learning on teaching in the block to all high school teachers. I guess that would be to Dr. Boyce, I guess, or Mrs. Parks.
To Dr. Title, to whoever he thinks on his staff would want to answer it.
Well, we'll start with Mrs. Parks, but I know that Mr. Hatz is lurking.
Mr. Hatz is probably chomping at the bit.
He's chomping at the bit.
Do you want to come out?
But go ahead. Why don't we ask the question, and then we'll figure out where to go from there.
She's asking for her lifeline from the very beginning.
Right.
That's true.
Quickly.
Right.
Okay, well, I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of how much, and I know that it says here year 1 of 3, but just in terms of the professional development for the high school teachers, is this, like, kind of what percentage of the professional development that the teachers are having is going to be based on this? Is it going to be solely with the teaching to the block, and with the kind of the plan to gradually decrease over the 3 years? I just wanted to get a sense of what the parameters were.
So last year, we started this already,
Right.
working with the teachers to address their concerns. As we try to do whenever we work with adult learners, is we try to figure out from them what are their needs first before we design what we're going to do with them, because they don't do well with us telling them what they need to do and know. So I think both high schools have put in a really rigorous, concerted effort to reach out to the teachers to find out what their needs are, and they've tried to design professional development that really meets the specific needs of the teachers in terms of what kinds of strategies do you want to learn more about for teaching in the block. Last year, I know at the high schools they spend a lot of time on how do you structure your time differently when you teach in a block. You're going from 40-some minutes to 80-some minutes. And then they got into specific strategies. So in terms of that's ongoing, and I think it was throughout most of last year, and I think it's continuing probably through this year, going into like percentages of, so there's also time for the teachers to spend with their departments. So there may be other things that they have to do with their departments, but I think on school-based time, they're probably all going to be working, on teaching in the block, depending on the teacher's needs. And some of the department time may also be spent on teaching in the block. There also may be curriculum work in department time. There also may be development of assessments. There's a lot of work that continues every year. So proportionally, I don't know, Mr. Hatzis may have a better idea of that.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to addressing the topic of teaching in the block, there's really a couple of elements. One is just the management of time. Instead of meeting every day for 44 minutes, now they're meeting every other day for 85 minutes. So you instantly gain some time from not having to ramp up, every day, and, collecting the homework, taking attendance, and all of those things that you do every day, because now you have them for a longer block of time. You have time to be more in-depth with the topic. So there's just the management of how I'm going to allocate the instruction, still deliver the curriculum. So there's that aspect of it. But the other thing, which I think is really the more meaty subject area for a lot of our teachers, is just quality instruction. It's an opportunity in restructuring their time to really take a look at teaching practice and student engagement practices, because now you have to engage them for a longer period of time as well. So those are some of the areas that we have really been talking about with our teachers. Even just, we have very limited time actually at the beginning of the school year, to focus on some of that, because there's a lot of other things that are happening in terms of, department time and district training that was going on. So just to get ramped up to the start of the year, we just simply focused on, what is a really good performance assessment? And just having an understanding of what that is, because what we know is that we're going to have a lot more emphasis on those types of assessments in the classroom. So that's just a small topic, but it has huge ramifications for how we're going to assess students in this longer block of time over the course of the year. And as Ms. Park said, now that, well, it's only day 3, but after we get a little bit of time under our belt, I think we're going to have a lot more feedback from teachers about, I could really use, some more background in this area. And, we have some dates targeted. Certainly the fall is going to be, is going to revolve all around any of the topics that we come up in professional development. They're going to be revolved around, that family of ideas that we just talked about.
Thank you.
I know Mr. Ebling is here, and I'd hate to think he didn't have a chance to say something. So if you have something to add to this, you're more than welcome to come up. You were hidden behind somebody.
No,
I didn't
that's,
see
that's
him.
fine, but just quickly, and I know
And you
Greg
might
was
wanna
leading
state
to
your
this
name for
point.
the
Oh, I'm sorry,
TV
David
audience.
Ebling, I'm the headmaster at Fairfield Ward High School.
Welcoming academic.
the welcoming, academic, respectful, dynamic, and ethical one. That's right. Thank you, Mrs. Parks. But one of the things that we've done at both high schools with the work with our curriculum leaders and the house masters is establish collaborative planning teams for all of our teachers. So every 4 days, our teachers are meeting in small groups around this idea of professional development with teaching in the block. Some of that is led by us, but we're hoping that as the teachers get more comfortable with this style of learning, that they're going to be generating their own ideas and their own needs for professional development. So the block actually allowed us that time with teachers. So that's something else that we're really looking forward to.
That would be number 22 in your program.
Anything else? No, but you don't have anything else, right?
Tell them not to leave.
And before you leave, well, no, go sit down, and that way then you can come back. Ms. Carnell, did you want to follow up on the block question?
Yes.
Yes. So, Ms. Parks, if a
No,
follow-up on...
no, I want the headmaster,
You would
the
like the
house
headmasters.
headmasters.
Yes.
Would make me go through. I was the new one. Now it's your turn.
So I guess the
So,
first
the
question,
question is...
was there a memo about the blue shirts and the khaki pants today, or was that? Just curious, you made reference to the teachers, but I'm sure the students have voiced their opinion even over the last 3 days. How has been the feedback about the new schedule?
Interesting. A couple of comments that we've heard from the students is that the day has actually gone faster than what they've experienced before, which we found kind of interesting because an 8-period day we thought was quite a rotation, but I think when they realized that they only have a maximum of 4 classes in one day, that the day's actually gone a little bit faster for them. And the feedback we've gotten through the students and through the teachers is they're actually enjoying it. So hopefully we can sustain that.
And as I think that we see over and over again in just about every change initiative that we implement in our district, the students adapt much more quickly than the adults do. So it has really been, considering everything that could have gone wrong with a brand new schedule, I mean, we're feeding every single child in the high school, the opportunity for lunch for the first time in I don't know how many years. And at Ludlow we had the construction project. So with all of those things going on, I have to say this has been one of the smoothest openings that we've had in years. And it's nothing short of a miracle. The hard work of all the folks in the district and the parents and support and the students have been absolutely phenomenal. So it's been great.
The feedback has been the staircase is beautiful and the cafeteria is amazing.
Well, that's important.
Anything else?
All right. So
Well,
I will now skip that topic under the opening of school report. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me go around the horn here. Mr. Convertito, any questions on the district improvement plan? No. Mr. Fattabine, do you have any questions? Let me go to Mr. Llewellyn, and then I'll go back for any final comments or questions from Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
You didn't even ask if I had questions, you just assumed.
You can pass.
Come on. Very quickly, though, parents have asked about the capstone and the, what that is. And I think you've touched on it briefly, but I think parents kind of want to get an understanding, from 10,000 feet about what it really means and the graduation piece of it.
Well, we're in the process of building toward that, so it's not actually a requirement at this point. I think there's a pretty good paragraph or two that we wrote in the district improvement plan under the description of things. So if parents do ask, what is a capstone, and you want to just point them to that page in the document, I think that would be a good starting point. And the idea of the capstone is that it's a way for students to bring their learning together, often from multiple disciplines, in the way you might use it in the real world, and really engage in a topic of their own interest and really dive deeply into a particular project. It is in the high school graduation requirements that the legislature passed. That's now been put off till the class of 2021, so it's not something we need to take immediate action. But knowing that it's coming, and by the way, I happen to believe that that is probably one reform effort in the high school reform package that passed that I believe has significant educational merit. We decided that even if the state sort of abandons ship on that or gives us a pass. We still want to implement it. But I think we're still a ways away from implementing that, so I don't think people need to be too nervous. And the other piece to that is that in the district improvement plan, there's reference to building skills for students at the earlier grades. So it's not something that just starts in 9th grade. So that there might be something that gets developed for, say, 8th grade, like a little mini capstone that kids do in 8th grade, maybe something in 5th grade. So they get used to that, and that's part of our work in the district improvement plan. But that is not imminent. And I don't know whether somebody has a district improvement plan here and could tell me the page number. Page 23.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to 20 and 21, which are, I think, linked here. So 20 is obviously going to happen this year because there's no timeline next to it. So can you speak to those two for us briefly, please?
Sure, I'll have Ann come up and speak if there's more specific questions. Actually, I'll just let her talk.
And actually, let me just read those for folks.
Yeah.
It's the implementation of the research-based common protocol to select most qualified applicant for vacant positions, and 21 would be develop and implement a new teacher academy to build capacity for all non-tenured teachers.
Right.
And that's a 1 to 2 year project.
Right,
Or 1
so-
or 2 years, sorry.
We'll look to develop that new teacher academy this year, and that'll be some work in conjunction with the instructional office to take a look at what types of integrated activities do we want to do to help them understand the curriculum, understand district practices. We do a 3-day teacher induction anyway, and that's been expanding each year. We've been adding a little bit more each year to that. But to really take a look at that on how we want to really help our non-tenured teachers. So those first 4 years, they're not tenured until the beginning of their 5th year, is to help them really get to learn the instructional practices and to learn the district. So we'll begin that work pretty soon to develop that and look to implement that for next year. The looking for most qualified applicants, there's a lot of information out there now on the types of questions that we ask applicants, how we ask them to come in and do a sample lesson for us when that's a possibility, and that's what I'm going to be looking at there. Not asking for specific, I'll give an example, not necessarily asking a potential teacher their philosophy of education, but their actions that they would take to support a student and give them some scenarios in that regard, what practices they would bring to the table. So that's all right now on the table as far as taking a look at all that and bringing it forward as a package and then working with our principals on that.
And is that a package that is kind of structured by some outside firm, or is that something we're developing internally?
No, we'll do that internally. We'll do research. It could be working with other HR directors, getting some ideas from other districts, because there's a lot of good work out there. And I don't see this as bringing in a consulting firm. I think this is
Well, I
something
didn't
going
mean
to
it
be.
that way. I mean, is there a model you're following?
Yeah.
So you're not reinventing?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes and no. Yes and no. We'll be doing some, we have some great internal practices that we'll probably look to say, it's working really well in this regard, so we want to make that a practice that we do across all our schools. So it's a little too early for me to tell you exactly where that's going to go at this point, but that's our thought on that.
Thank
Okay?
you.
Mr. Llewellyn, before you move on to a different item number, I think Mrs. Maxon-Knelly wanted to follow up on those items. Would you mind? Thank you.
Regarding the outside firm, in terms of a survey, we had something I thought that we did contract with through an outside firm. So there is something that we're already in the practice of using at this point. That wasn't internally devised.
Correct. So that's something to really look at, and thanks for bringing that up. Our teachers who apply to the district go through a questioning process, a questionnaire, and we've just completed our first year. We're working with the company to look at how our use was and information we got from that, to take a look at not the previous survey we used that really looked at their thinking and philosophical point of view on teaching, but to look at what evidence do we have that this teacher would be more effective in the classroom. It's that effectiveness in front of kids and helping students learn. So that's what we're looking for there.
Thank you. Mr. Llewellyn, your next item?
So it's basically a continuation of what you'd started last year?
That one piece, correct, yes.
Thank you. I guess through the chair to Dr. Title, number 29, the school safety. Thank you very much. The school safety, in terms of the new online reporting, how has that worked for the district over the last 6 months or so since it's been implemented? Has it been receptive? Is it getting use? Are the reports coming in?
You're talking about the TIPS program? Yeah, that's really not necessarily part of 29, but Andrea can handle that.
The TIPS program is in use. We get reports. None of our original fears of thousands and thousands of thousands of reports have realized themselves, but we have gotten reports. We've actually gotten some excellent reports, both anonymously and discreetly, that have helped us help kids who may have been those kids who were kind of not noticed but struggling. We've had reports and done bullying investigations. We've had reports of potential safety threats, both anonymously and discreetly. So I'd say it's a small amount of money well spent.
Good. That's good to hear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And again, before you move on to the next topic, I think Ms. Carnell wanted to follow up again on items number 20 and 21.
Thank you. Just think of the exercise. I just quickly.
Feels good to stretch.
You had mentioned interviewing teachers for their plans and having them present. How do we work their actual knowledge of the subject matter? How is that added to the interview?
And that's where you, well, there's a few ways. First of all teachers in the state of Connecticut need to go through subject-specific assessments. So that's the first step in getting a certification. They have to pass those assessments in order to be certified by the state of Connecticut. But I'll use the high school, for example, because I think it's a little bit more discreet. When you're looking for a teacher, for example, in science, our science teachers are part of the process, our science curriculum leader is part of the process, and their questioning leads them to have an understanding of a teacher's practice and understanding in the subject area.
Thank
you.
Okay? Sorry to make you stretch.
Okay.
No, it feels good.
Is that,
Yeah,
okay.
thank
Mr. Llewellyn, you have another point?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done. Thank you very much to the staff for the hard work that they're about to do.
Right, yeah, the hard work is starting.
Leadership. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. The recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the August 25th, 2015 regular meeting. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Mrs. Gerber. Any comments or questions or changes to the minutes? None, hearing none. It seems we have people leaving.
Yeah.
Again, in staying with a strict reading of the bylaws, any member of the public wish to comment on the minutes? I see nobody coming forward. Back to the board for action.
I have one comment.
Mrs. Lou McCormick, you have a question on the minutes?
Yes. I wasn't at this meeting, I don't believe. But there was a reference to me, I think, on the second page, on the very bottom where it says motion passed 7-0. Do you see? On the, flip to the second page.
Could you get us to where you specifically are talking about? Page
That's what I'm
2.
saying. Yeah, page 2 on the bottom where it says motion passed 7-0. Do you see the very bottom? It says Mr. Llewellyn moved, and then it has Mr. Llewellyn, Ms. Carnell, and then Mr. Dwyer. So it's the third quote from the bottom. You see Mr. Dwyer?
Okay. You're
Okay.
talking about my quote. Okay.
It says would not support postponing. He has spoken to both members, and neither had any comments on the commission statement.
Correct.
I'm just saying, I don't believe we had any discussion on the commission statement before that, because I was on vacation, so I don't know that I could have spoken about it. I'm just clarifying that's not really.
Okay, so it's a run-on sentence. I have spoken to both of you for serving, and
Correct, for
neither
serving.
of you had comments to me prior to the meeting that we discussed this. It's a run-on sentence, and so...
It's just that I didn't have,
So
we never
correct.
discussed comments
So-
on the
so,
commission statement.
Saying, and also neither had any comments, probably would be a... If I had spoken to both of you about serving, and also neither of you made comments about the commission statement.
We never discussed the commission statement. I'm just saying that there's no point in having that line because it implies that I reviewed the
I was
commission statement.
reporting that neither of the two of you made any comments on the commission statement?
The motion is about the commission statement change.
Yeah, the motion's about the commission statement change, and we weren't even at the meeting to discuss the commission statement, so.
She's saying we didn't make any
And
comments.
neither of you made any comments to me or the board about,
It wasn't about the commission statement change, it was about a vote to postpone.
yeah.
So the motion was about a vote to postpone because you weren't present.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
Do you have a proposed change to the language?
So,
I mean, I was just saying that you should strike that, or, because we didn't have any comments. I mean, you don't know that I didn't have any comments because we never spoke about it. I'm just saying, it implies that you asked me whether I had a comment or not, and that I said, no, I have no comments on it. So I'm just saying that it's kind of superfluous to have that in there, because the discussion was never had regarding
I did
comments on
make
the
the
commission
comment.
statement.
I did make the comment. Okay, the motion is on the table. Are we ready to act on it? Okay. All in favor of the motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the August 25th, 2015 regular meeting, please raise your hand. Mr. Patton, Ms. Carnell, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Maxon Connelly, opposed? Mrs. Lou McCormick, Mr. Fattabine, Mr. Llewellyn. The motion passes 6-3. On to the superintendent's report.
Excuse me. Point of order.
Sorry, I just
Ms. Gerber,
yawned.
could you please make the current minutes reflect the comment that?
The minutes have been approved, so we
I
can't change
understand.
them
I'm
now.
asking for the current minutes, please. The current minutes that Ms. Lou McCormick stated that the discussion was never had, and that her view is that that is superfluous.
Mr. Llewellyn,
and would
when the
lead someone to
minutes
believe.
come up for discussion to approve them,
You can veto them then,
you
you're
can bring
right.
your
Sorry.
comment forward. Thank you. Superintendent's report on the overview of opening day of school.
I'm going to limit this, owing to the hour, to a couple of topics. One is to review the first day elementary and secondary enrollment, knowing that this is a first day count and that this is not official till October 1st. So we are lower than we were on October 1st, 2014. And that's largely due to fewer students in the elementary grades. We're about 40 students lower in kindergarten compared to the projected number. Projected number in kindergarten was about 685. We're about 645 in round numbers. So now, people are still registering. It doesn't mean because they have an appointment to register that they're actually going to get into the system. But, you know, we're not done. But at this point, that looks like one area where there are fewer kids. And it's mostly an issue at the kindergarten level. We did pick up some kids in other levels. We did lose some kids in other levels. And as Ann will tell you when she comes up here, it just so happened that the kids who came into places where we needed to add a section, and when the kids didn't appear, it didn't help us by subtracting a section. So despite the fact that we are below projections at the elementary level, we actually had to add 4 elementary sections. That's called the luck of the draw. At the secondary level, we're very close to the projected numbers are actually higher in both the middle school and the high school than projections. But in some, we're about, again, this is kind of, we're about 50 students sort of net down from the projected numbers. We were projected to go down somewhat from the October 1, 2014, but the middle school and high school pretty much held their own. Warren and Ludlow were, you know, neck and neck again, as we expected. And so basically, we ended up with fewer kids right now than we anticipated by about 50, which is about 0.5%. However, we did have to add some positions, and I'm going to have Ann come up and talk you through that, which is on the next page. One thing that I know is a concern, obviously we had some issues with staffing last year at the beginning of the year, and we're in much better shape than we were then. We didn't have quite as many late resignations, but I'd like Ann to review the certified staffing update so you know where we stand on that front.
Thanks. So very simply, on the first day of school, August 31st, that our teachers were back. Of the 1,000 certified staff positions, all but 5.1 were fully staffed. Of that 5.1, only a 0.6 position at the high school was a vacancy. The other 4.5 positions are folks that we've hired, but due to the lateness of several resignations, and then that led us to some late hiring, we have 3 Spanish positions open that districts are holding those folks. We have a middle school psychologist position 1.0 being held at this point. He's been hired, but will come later. And we have a social worker for the community partnership program, 0.5, and she's being held, and we expect her to join us in a couple of weeks as well. So I think we're in really good shape as far as staffing. As Dr. Title said, much better than where we were last year. Elementary, of the change in staffing, we added 5.3 positions. 4 of those are classroom sections, and I'll tell you the action was at Dwight. 3 sections were added at Dwight Elementary School. We had 3 grade levels where 1 or 2 more students would push them over. In some buildings, we could add 10 students to a grade level and wouldn't have to add a section. Dwight, we added 3 more sections at 3 different grade levels. The additional 1.3 is adjustments for special area teachers for music, art, world language, PE, those kinds of classes. Middle school, we are right on the button. No change at all at the middle school level. There wasn't anywhere near as much activity with hiring there. High school, 4.8 positions we added, mostly due to course selection changes. And I will say the summer was very interesting. Earlier on, in the late June and into July, we were hiring the high school folks. We had a lot of activity there. And then later on in the summer was where the elementary action took place. The enrollments, I'll give a shout out to Meg Brown, who did a lot of work every day or two. I think by early August, I was asking her for updates on the enrollment. Mike Cummings and I would take a look at it. They were changing day by day by day. And so we had some work to do as far as watching the sections very closely. The administrators did an amazing job with their hiring this summer, brought in some really quality candidates. I'm very impressed with them. Spent 3 days with them in August, met them one-on-one, each and every one of them, and I'm very impressed with the folks we have on board. So we dropped 0.4 of a position at the district-wide level as well. The total FTE change compared to the budget was we've added 9.7 FTE based on above and beyond where we were in the budget. So this breaks it down across the sections.
And I should point out the point about holding teachers. There's nothing in a teacher's contract or nothing in a union contract anywhere that requires that to happen. It's a gentleman's agreement or gentlewoman's agreement between superintendents that if we hire somebody from your district after August 1st, that district can hold that person for 30 days into the school year or until somebody is found. And it works, of course, both ways. Somebody who hires somebody from us, we can hold them for 30 days until they go elsewhere. That's usually doesn't occur all that much, but so that's the way that happens. So Ann may have extended an offer of employment a week before school or had the position filled, but the other superintendent has decided that he or she wants to exercise the right to retain the person. So they're coming, the contract is signed, we just have to adjust.
Yeah, it's much more common in the shortage areas, and Spanish is a shortage area, world language is a shortage area. So.
Right. Okay, so those are really the 2 big points I wanted to make on the opening of school.
Okay, Ms. Carnell, followed by Mr. Llewellyn.
Okay, through the chair to Ms. Levitt. You said that we've added right now today 9.7 FTE. So I just want to make sure I'm following you. Was these positions in the budget, or now we will scramble to figure out how to pay for these additional teachers? Because if I understood you correctly, we didn't expect to need those teachers.
Correct.
Okay. So we hired 9.7 teachers. Now what do we do?
So we'll be looking at the budget to see how we're going to pay for those. We didn't have a choice when you add sections or more kids enroll at the elementary level. The high school courses, we couldn't cover all the courses based on selection. We did our best to match as many requests that students had. We couldn't meet them all, but we found some areas where we saw some big increases in enrollment there, so, and course selection.
As happens every year, if there's an overage in one line item, the superintendent is responsible to find the money in other line items throughout the year. So that will be his job, to balance the budget. We can't leave a classroom vacant.
And we're not
No,
done.
I hope not.
Well, it's not much vacant, but at the elementary level, there's nothing cast in stone about adding those sections. However, the board has had a longstanding practice of class size limits at the elementary level of 23 in grades K to 2 and 25 in grades 3 to 5, with the exception of McKinley, that's 2 less than that. So once we hit the magic number, we automatically add to that. There's nothing in a union contract that forces us to do it, but to maintain equity across the system, we feel an obligation to reduce that. So if there are 50 kids sitting in a 5th grade, we'll budget for 2 sections there. If over the summer nobody leaves and 2 kids show up, now we have to add there. And generally, sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. That's obviously our job through the year to ensure that we can find the funds to cover that. At the high school level, we do have some load requirements that teachers can only teach so many kids. And because we really wanted to have as many kids get as many choices as possible, we made the decision to add basically a couple teachers at each high school. On a percentage, it looks like a big number. On a percentage basis, you're talking about 10 divided by 1,000. So this is your SBAC math question.
Does that answer your question?
That one, but I have one more.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's our job. It's our job to find the money.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure how to do this as to earlier, but I'd like to put a motion on the table. So I'm going to let you set the direction of this. Do you want me to state my motion, or?
What is the topic, and then?
Exit interviews of people leaving the district.
You'd have to put a motion on the table to add a topic for discussion. You'd have to achieve 6 votes to add the topic.
So I'd like, excuse me, I'd like to put a motion on the table to add the topic of exit interviews.
Is there a second for that motion? Mr. Llewellyn, you want to argue on behalf of the motion?
Oh, I don't want to argue, but I'd like to discuss my
present.
point. I know it's something that I've talked about in the past. It hasn't made the agenda, and I'm not sure why the board wouldn't want to understand why teachers are leaving the district. So I can't say I want to argue for it. The question is, why would anybody not want to know this information? That I'd like to understand.
Yeah. Mr. Llewellyn, you seconded as the motion to add an agenda item, not on the motion itself, on the topic
I did,
itself.
but I think I need Dr. Title back to ask, to help with the argument here. Maybe you can answer the questions. How many teacher resignations and retirements did we have last year?
Coming into this year, for this school year?
This current fiscal year.
22 retirements, and I think we're at 44 resignations. And I have to tell you, I have a really good idea why those 44 people left. I do. While it's not a formal exit interview, sorry.
The fact was asked,
Sorry.
and you answered about 60 total, give or take.
66.
66. Any other questions for the motion to
I
add a
think
topic to the agenda?
if we take a look at the number of teachers who have resigned and retired over the last 4 years, it is incumbent upon this board to want to understand from an outside party why we've had such a significant number. If you take a look at the number in the couple years prior to that, the level of resignations and retirements were not the same. I don't know if you know off the top of your head what the historical run rate was, but there's been a spike over the last 4 years. I think it's incumbent on this board to understand why we are having teachers leave the district.
Thank you.
And given, I'm
You're
sorry.
arguing the issue as opposed to the issue to add to the item, that's all.
Given that a lot of you folks are up for re-election, I can't believe you wouldn't want to understand
Thank
why.
you for bringing politics into this.
Brought it
For the
earlier,
motion
thanks.
to add an item to the agenda. Everybody understand the motion? Do you want to read it so that it's clear?
Motion is to add a topic of exit interviews to the agenda.
Is that correct? Okay. Any further comment that people want to make on adding the item to the agenda as opposed to the topic itself?
Just a brief comment. I'm going to reiterate Mr. Patton's comment regarding the earlier add to the agenda. And Ms. Carnell and I have spoken about the topic of exit interviews, and I fully support that notion, and we've had many conversations about it. I just don't believe that ultimately it would be about 10:35 is the time to introduce a new topic for which the staff has had no preparation. Has nothing to do with the topic itself, which I have fully endorsed. I simply don't endorse and won't support adding it to the agenda at this hour.
Could I make a friendly amendment, please? To add it to the next regular agenda.
I guess I don't understand what work it would require at this hour to just vote. No, I need to understand.
First, Mr. Llewellyn's suggestion to ask for a friendly amendment, I need to deal with that before we get back to the original discussion. That's all, just technical.
No, I understand, but I'd rather not. But if
No,
there's an
you don't
issue
want
where the staff needs to prepare, then I want to be sensitive to that issue at this hour.
Okay, but the answer is no, you don't want to take the...
No, that's not what I said. I'm trying to understand, before I answer it, what would the staff need to do to vote on this? That's what I'm trying to understand. If there is a staff issue, I am more than willing to put this off to the next meeting.
I think our bylaws generally say that we don't act on an item that the staff have not had a chance to review prior to it coming on the agenda, but we're talking about whether we shall add something to the agenda, not the topic itself.
Why don't we switch it, excuse me, and I'm fine with the change in the motion, excuse me, that we add it to the next agenda item.
And any, that requires, since the motion belongs to the board at the moment, is there anybody objecting to the change? Okay, then please read the motion as changed, and we'll vote on it.
Motion to add a topic of exit interviews to the agenda of the next regular Board of Ed meeting.
Thank you. Everybody clear? All in favor, please raise your hand. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Fattabine, Mrs. Maxon. I'm sorry, it's not clear to me, Mrs. Maxon.
I'm not clear on the motion.
Yeah,
Is it
neither am I.
A voting item that's going to be added, or a discussion item that's going to be added to the next amendment?
It simply says the topic of exit interviews to the agenda of the next regular Board of Ed meeting.
Discussion.
First have to add it to this meeting.
Well, you're asking for a
But
motion.
there's no motion.
No,
You
there's-
can't make a motion now to add something, so
Yeah, to a future agenda. This is a. this
we're
is a
getting
motion
right back to
add
the
back
first
to
public
agenda.
speaker that talked today, okay? Procedurally, you have to have a motion to add a motion, to vote on the motion, to add the discussion to the next amendment, to the next agenda.
Oh, my God.
So, we're back, do you understand that we're back to the topic of adding a discussion of exit interviews to tonight's agenda?
Correct. But what was shared by another board member is that it might take work on the administration. You, if I understood you correctly, said that we don't do that if the administration needs to do work on it. So I'm not sure how I get this on the agenda.
Mr. Dwyer.
So,
This is not how.
well, this is not how, but this is a motion for tonight's agenda.
I'm sorry, what?
This is a motion for tonight's agenda. Future agendas by our bylaw are established by the chair in cooperation with the superintendent and in consultation with the secretary and the vice chair. That's how future agendas are developed.
Correct, so,
So a motion to change that procedure would be effectively changing the bylaws and therefore would be out of order.
Mr. Dwyer, I am not looking to change bylaws. I'm not looking to go past 11 o'clock. I am looking to make a motion that we discuss exit interviews
On tonight's agenda.
on tonight's agenda.
Shall you restate the motion as Ms. Carnell stated it? And I believe, Mr. Llewellyn, have you followed Ms. Carnell's?
I've followed it, but may I interject a question, point of order for you?
Let me get the motion clarified to everybody.
Motion to add a topic of exit interviews to the agenda.
Okay.
So deal with that.
So, what's your question?
Could you just make it easy on the board, and you and Dr. Title agree that you'll put it on the next agenda to discuss
We'll
it?
deal with this motion on the table at the moment.
So that's a no. Thank you very much,
I will
Mr.
not
Dwyer.
be changing the bylaws.
It's not the bylaws. You have complete control over the agenda, and we've asked to have it put on.
Yes, correct.
That is correct.
Any further questions on the motion to add a topic to tonight's agenda? If there are none,
I guess I do have one further question, even though I made the
adding a
motion.
topic to tonight's agenda.
Correct. This is, I guess my question is, and I've asked this, and I'd like an answer, what work does this put on the administration to vote whether we can put a motion out there to add exit interviews?
That's a conversation you can have with Dr. Title so that you understand it.
I'm asking you, you're the chairman. One board member made a comment that it could be, the administration would need to do work.
Yeah, that is a pretty standard comment for board members to make, to take into consideration that staff may have to do work. It's not because any board member knows specifically what level of work. It's just acknowledgement that any question requires staff to do work,
To vote on a motion.
to add an item to the agenda. This is just to add an item to tonight's agenda, is my understanding of your motion.
Will give work to the administration? I'm not sure I'm following you, so I apologize.
First, the motion has to be to add the topic of exit interviews to tonight's agenda. Has nothing to do with staff work. It's whether the board wants to entertain a new discussion item to tonight's agenda.
Okay.
That's what the motion is. If you don't secure 6 votes to do that, then there is no topic to discuss.
Point of order.
Regarding regarding the motion on the floor?
Yes, regarding the whole procedure here. By a two-thirds vote, can this board add something to the next agenda, yes or no? Mr.
No,
Convertito, did you say that
No, the
by
bylaws
two-thirds?
state that the agenda
The
is
chair to Mr.
created.
Convertito,
Correct.
please, because he had stated.
I would have to look at the policy book. Okay,
So it's pretty
I'm not
simplistic.
positive, and I
It's
don't
pretty
wanna give
simplistic
you-
what's going on here. We're trying to add something to a agenda, whether it be tonight or to the next agenda. The chair, in consultation with the superintendent, have complete control over the agenda. We have asked, may I finish?
No, I want to correct your
Oh,
misstatement.
and the vice chair.
Yes, and
There
the
you go.
secretary, correct.
So we have asked to add this to an agenda, and as opposed to going through all these gyrations that you seem to make folks go through every time we'd like to bring up a topic, you could say, hey, I'll be a gentleman and I'll add that to the agenda, because I know on that survey, over
Excuse
half
me.
the people.
Points of order are
over
on
half the
parliamentary
people raise their hand
questions,
at it.
not to advance your own
I'm not
viewpoint
advancing
of
it.
life. Do you have a parliamentary question
I
on the
did.
motion?
I do. And my parliamentary question is, can two-thirds add it to the next agenda?
No.
No, it's consultation
So
with.
we are back to the original motion to add the topic of exit interviews to tonight's agenda. That is the motion that we must both discuss and act on. All in favor of adding the topic of exit interviews, read the actual motion so that it's clear.
The motion is to add a topic of exit interviews to the agenda.
John, do you need the bylaws? They're in here. Here. Okay, so,
Mr. Dwyer, for the sake of consistency, should we go to the public for comment on this vote?
no, Mr. Fattabine, I think correctly stated that
That's
this is an
inconsistent.
administrative matter.
Point of order. You can't pick and choose. The chair should not
Fattabine
be
correctly
able
pointed
to.
out that this is an administrative matter that is not an agenda item according to our bylaws. So I take Mr. Fattabine's correction to heart and will act accordingly.
Inconsistent policies and
On it,
procedures.
No, please.
On the motion to add an item to tonight's agenda. Mr. Convertito, are you ready to vote on that particular motion? There may be another question that will come out. Mrs. Gerber, would you read the motion? Mrs. Maxon Connelly? Mrs.
Motion
Maxon-Connelly?
to add a topic of exit interviews to the agenda.
You ready to act on that?
Are we done with board discussion?
You're-
In all due respect to Ms. Carnell, I will not be voting for it, but I give you my word, I will take it up in policy with Ms. Connelly and you and bring it back to the board.
With all due respect,
Because I believe the hiring practices are within the policy manual, and we would have to amend that.
Okay, so on the motion to add a topic to the agenda concerning exit interviews, all in favor, please raise your hand. Mrs. Lou McCormick, Ms. Carnell, Mr. Fattabine, Mr. Llewellyn, all opposed? Mr. Patton, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Maxon Connelly, the motion loses 4-5. Anything further on the opening day of school?
I do have a question.
First, I'm asking Dr. Tyler
Okay.
if there's any further comments. You have a question on the opening day of school?
I do.
Yes, please.
Am I reading the pink sheets correctly? So when I look at sections added or dropped, would they, how do you do your analysis? Do you do September versus the June pink sheet?
Added and dropped, yeah, you'd have to look at the budget book to see what the number of sections was that were budgeted by school, and then you compare this sheet to that budgeted number.
Okay, so it's not a matter of what was added and dropped. So when you say that 4 sections were added since June.
Yeah, that's a net.
That's 4 sections were added versus the budget.
Correct.
But in reality, 6 sections were added and 2 are collapsed, is that correct?
Some may have been collapsed, some may have been, I don't know. The net was 4.
The net was 4.
The net was 4, that's the important thing.
So the net real sections versus actual enrollment was 6 up, 2 down to net 4.
I'm not sure about the
versus
2
budget was
down,
4 as
but-
well.
Yeah, we're down a few sections.
Okay.
And I want to say it's 7.
7
3.
up.
I want to
Three
say
down.
it's, yeah, I think that's what it is, but I'd have to go back and look at my record.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's versus budget, okay.
It's versus budget, right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anything else, Mr. Llewellyn? Nope. Okay, on to committee liaison reports. The only person I know that said they wanted to make a comment is Mr. Convertito, but if there are other board members that wish to comment, please follow up. Mr. Convertito?
Just very quickly, we had the first meeting of our redistricting subcommittee. Organizational, basically, we are in the process now of going through some of the older guidelines and guiding principles that previous boards have voted on and making sure that they fit within what our requirements are. If there are changes or the committee feels we need to make changes, I just want the board to be aware that we will be bringing those back to the board as needed.
Mr. Llewellyn, you have a liaison report?
I do. From the CES meeting, we went through a lot of good information with the commissioner as it relates to testing. But one of the pieces that came up that I think the public would really be interested in is the state is doing their 5-year strategic plan and their theme is equity and excellence, but they're going to be looking for focus groups of parents as well as administrators and teachers. So people should express their views, or at least try and get involved in those focus groups if the opportunity arises. But if you were to reach out to the folks up at CES, they may be able to at least put your name on that list.
Thank you. Any other committee or liaison reports that people wish to report on?
Just really briefly, the Ludlow High School Building Committee will be having their first meeting since the start of school. That's tomorrow night at Ludlow, and there will be a walkthrough prior to the meeting, which will be at 7:30 in the Teachers' Lounge.
Others? As Mrs. Lou McCormick probably knows, the town-wide capital planning workshop that the Board of Finance normally schedules and conducts will be, is scheduled, I think, for September 12th? 15th. And that will be our first opportunity to officially get some rough feedback. The Board of Finance has not generally wanted to give specific feedback and approval to capital plans because they consider that they give the approval for individual projects as they come forward, but we'll get some rough feedback from them on the long-range facilities plan that was adopted. Any other comments from committee and liaison? If not, we'll move on to open board comment. Any comments, Mrs. Maxon Connelly?
I just wanted to remind the board and extend the invitation to the public for anyone who's still tuned in or who watches this, that the retirement party for the ward headmaster, Mr. Coyne, is taking place on Thursday, September 24th. It's at the Brooklawn Country Club. You do need to RSVP and take care of that ahead of time because they have to give them a head count. But I did check with Mr. Ebling about issuing that invitation to the public and making people aware that this would be a chance to honor him at this retirement party. I think it's a great setting and could be a really fun event. It's at 4 o'clock in the afternoon prior to our board meeting, so I just wanted to let the public make them aware of that.
So for board members, water and juice will be served. Mr. Fattabine? Mr. Fattabine, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Gerber?
Yeah, actually, well, there are a couple of things. First, I kept trying to find time to say this, and we kept running over in June, so we didn't have open board comment. But back in May, I was able to go to the Ludlow High School National Honor Society induction, and where they showed all of the different colleges that the graduating seniors were going to. And I also spoke to people who went to the National Honor Society induction at Ward. And so I just have a really quick listing, and I just want to run down some of the schools that some of the graduates have just started attending this fall. We have MIT, Lehigh, Lafayette, Colby, University of Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, Brown, UPenn, Cornell, UVA, Vanderbilt, BC, Duke, Colgate, University of Chicago, Bucknell, Villanova, Georgetown, and that's just a really brief sampling, but just, you know, it's nice to say something positive once in a while about the accomplishments of all of our students. And, you know, there are many more who also went to and have just started at really excellent schools in the past couple of weeks. Also, I didn't know if anyone had seen this. This is the annual Fairfield Living magazine. Every year they do profiles of high school students. There are some Ludlow and Ward students featured in this article, and there's also a discussion talking about Common Core as well. So it's out on the stands now, and if anyone wants to check it out.
Ms. Cornell, any open, Mr. Patton? Mrs. McCormick? Mr. Llewellyn? Okay, a motion to adjourn, that this regular meeting of the Board of Education adjourn. Do I have a motion? Mr. Convertito, seconded by Mrs. Maxon Connelly. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you.